What if Superman's greatest challenge in Season 3 isn't a powerful alien, a supervillain, or even an army? What if his biggest challenge is simply understanding what it means to be human? My Adventures with Superman is back with Season 3, and the premiere immediately proves that this season is going to be very different from what we've seen before. Episode 1, titled Into the New World, brings Clark, Lois, Jimmy, and Kara together for what initially looks like a fun Halloween adventure. But underneath the costumes, pumpkins, and jokes is a much darker story involving secret government experiments, Kryptonian DNA, a mysterious clone, and a shocking connection to the Superman mythology. And the ending makes things even more interesting. Because while Superman survives the episode, someone else is quietly preparing to become one of his most dangerous enemies. Hank Henshaw. And if you know the Superman comics, you already know why that name should get your attention. So today we're breaking down the entire Season 3 premiere, explaining what happened to Kara, why Jimmy is holding back his feelings, what Project Caliban was really trying to create, who B1Z is, why this character appears to be this show's version of Bizarro, how Superman is saved at the end, and most importantly, what that shocking Hank Henshaw reveal could mean for the rest of Season 3. Let's get into it. Season 2 recap. Before we get into the new episode, we need to remember where Season 2 left our characters. Clark had spent most of the previous season struggling with his identity and his relationship with Krypton. Then Kara Zor-El arrived. At first, Clark believed that Kara could become a hero just like him. But Kara had spent years under the control of Brainiac, who had manipulated her into believing that conquering civilizations was her purpose. Brainiac turned Kara into a weapon. He convinced her that she was doing what was necessary to preserve Kryptonian culture. Clark eventually realized what was happening and tried to reach Kara instead of simply defeating her. Meanwhile, Lois and Jimmy continued helping Clark while dealing with their own problems. And eventually, Clark managed to break through to Kara. The two cousins joined forces against Brainiac. The Kandorian threat was defeated, and Kara finally got the chance to make her own choices. But the damage Brainiac had done didn't simply disappear. Kara was free, but she still had to figure out who she actually was. Was she the conqueror Brainiac created, or could she become the hero Clark believed she could be? That question becomes one of the biggest themes of Season 3, and the premiere wastes no time reminding us of it. The Fortress of Solitude. The episode begins at the Fortress of Solitude. Clark and Kara have returned to the place that represents their Kryptonian heritage. But the fortress is not simply an empty ice palace. There are systems and robotic Kryptonian servants waiting for them. Clark encounters the fortress's robotic stewards, who immediately start talking about something called the Kandorian Crisis. They want Clark to understand Kryptonian history and traditions. But there's a problem. Clark isn't really interested in becoming the perfect Kryptonian. He has spent his entire life becoming Superman on Earth. His parents raised him. His friends shaped him. Lois changed him. Earth changed him. So when these Kryptonian machines tell him that he needs to learn their ways, Clark isn't exactly enthusiastic. And there's something unsettling about the way they speak to him. They aren't simply offering advice. They sound like they expect Clark to obey. This becomes important because Clark is going to spend much of this season trying to understand where he belongs. Is he a human who happens to be Kryptonian? Or is he a Kryptonian who happens to live as a human? Kara is dealing with an even bigger version of that problem. She goes deeper into the fortress, where she confronts the remaining influence of Brainiac. Kara wants to separate herself from him completely. She wants Brainiac out of her head, out of her identity, and out of her future. But Brainiac's warning is brutal. He tells Kara that she's making a mistake, because sooner or later, people are going to see her as the monster she used to be. Kara doesn't accept that. She tells him, essentially, that she knows who she is. And that's the point. For the first time, Kara isn't allowing someone else to define her. Not Brainiac, not Krypton, not even Clark. She has to make her own choices. And that brings us to one of the most important ideas in the episode. Your past can influence you, but it doesn't have to control you. Halloween at the Kent farm. After all that serious Kryptonian drama, the episode suddenly changes tone. It's Halloween, and everyone is at the Kent family farm. Clark, Lois, Jimmy, and Kara are enjoying a completely normal day. Well, as normal as things can be when one of your friends is literally Supergirl. Kara is having an amazing time. She's discovering Earth's culture and enjoying things that she never experienced under Brainiac. She's dressed up, she's excited about Halloween, and she's clearly enjoying her freedom. And there's another important relationship developing. Kara and Jimmy. The two clearly like each other. They spend a lot of time together. They watch television. They joke around. They explore Earth together. And Lois immediately notices what's happening. She starts teasing Jimmy because, from her perspective, the chemistry is obvious. But Jimmy refuses to admit it. And this is where we learn something important about him. Jimmy genuinely likes Kara. He's attracted to her. He thinks she's beautiful. He enjoys being around her. But he doesn't think he's good enough for her. Jimmy believes Kara has an entire world to discover. She has spent years being controlled by Brainiac. She barely understands Earth. So Jimmy convinces himself that the best thing he can do is stay out of her way. He thinks Kara should have the freedom to experience the world without becoming attached to him too quickly. It's actually a very sweet motivation. But it's also going to create a problem, because Kara doesn't seem to agree with Jimmy's plan. She clearly enjoys being around him. And the episode makes it feel like this relationship could become a major storyline throughout Season 3. Clark and Lois. While Jimmy is struggling with his feelings for Kara, Clark has another relationship problem. Clark wants a future with Lois. And he doesn't just mean next week. He means a real future. A home, a farm, a dog, maybe eventually a family. Clark even starts looking at houses outside Metropolis. For Clark, this seems completely natural. He grew up with Ma and Pa Kent. He had a loving childhood. He associates the Kent farm with safety, family, and belonging. So he wants to recreate that feeling with Lois. But Lois reacts very differently. And this makes perfect sense when we remember her childhood. Lois didn't grow up the way Clark did. Her father, General Sam Lane, was constantly involved in the military. She moved around. She grew up around danger, secrecy, and responsibility. So when Clark starts talking about a house, a school district, and a family future, Lois doesn't hear happy ending. She hears huge life-changing commitment. Clark realizes he's moving too quickly. And once again, the episode shows how different their backgrounds are. Clark believes change can be good. Lois is afraid that change could destroy something that already works. Their relationship isn't falling apart, but they're definitely not standing in the same place emotionally. The return of Sam Lane. Then comes another surprise. Sam Lane shows up at the Kent family farm. And this is interesting because Sam is no longer the same man we knew before. After everything that happened in Season 2, his relationship with Superman and his daughter has changed dramatically. Sam is now working with the Pentagon. He's also trying to repair his relationship with Lois. He gives her a sentimental gift that represents finding her direction in life. But Sam didn't come only to talk about family. He also has information. A Pentagon server has been breached, and the stolen files involve a decommission project called Project Caliban. This project is extremely important because it wasn't simply another military weapons program. It involved Kryptonian DNA. The government had been experimenting with biological material recovered after the events of Zero Day. They were trying to create something powerful enough to compete with Superman. And that immediately raises a major question. Why would the government try to create its own Kryptonians? The answer is simple. Fear. Even after Superman saved the world, there are still people who believe that Earth needs protection from Kryptonians. And instead of trusting Superman, they want their own weapon. That's exactly what Project Caliban represents. Humanity trying to control something it doesn't fully understand. The Caliban facility. Clark, Lois, Jimmy, and Kara investigate the facility. At first, the place looks abandoned. There are no normal roads leading there. There isn't even proper plumbing. Some of the buildings don't look like functioning buildings at all. Everything feels fake. And then they discover something even stranger. A strange animal appears. It looks partly like a dog and partly like something completely alien. Kara, of course, immediately assumes it's a dog. Jimmy has to explain that not every Earth animal is a dog. It's a funny moment, but it also foreshadows something important. Because this facility isn't simply experimenting with Kryptonians. It's creating hybrid life. The team eventually discovers signs of a violent struggle. There are government records, confidential documents, DNA samples, and then Kara sees something that immediately gets her attention. Kryptonian DNA. The government wasn't simply studying Kryptonians. They were trying to recreate them. They were trying to manufacture beings with Kryptonian abilities. And that leads them underground. The secret lab. Deep inside the facility, the group discovers a laboratory. There are tanks, genetic equipment, failed experiments, and records referring to different subjects. One particular subject stands out. B1. The team eventually discovers that B1 Z was one of the successful experiments. But he wasn't exactly what the scientists expected. The creature they've been searching for is alive. And it's not simply a monster. It's something much more complicated. The group encounters a strange Kryptonian clone. He's powerful. He's physically intimidating. But there's something childlike about him. He doesn't behave like a trained soldier. He doesn't behave like a weapon. And most importantly, he's afraid. This is where the episode begins transforming from a superhero mystery into an emotional story. Dr. George Otto Binder. The heroes discover the body of Dr. George Otto Binder. His name is a major Easter egg for Superman fans. The real Otto Binder was one of the legendary writers associated with Superman mythology. He helped create or shape several important characters, including Supergirl and Bizarro. So seeing his name here isn't random. The show is deliberately telling us that something connected to classic Superman mythology is about to happen. Binder appears to have been responsible for Project Caliban. But the more the heroes investigate, the more they realize that he wasn't simply creating a monster. He was raising a child. There are recordings of Binder teaching B1Z. He tells him to be kind. He tells him not to hurt people. He teaches him that anger is not an excuse for violence. And he teaches him something extremely important, that he has a choice. He can decide what kind of person he wants to become. This is incredibly similar to how Jonathan and Martha Kent raised Clark. Clark was born with incredible power, but his parents taught him that power means responsibility. Binder was trying to do the same thing. He knew B1, Z could become dangerous, but instead of treating him like a weapon, he treated him like a son. And that completely changes the meaning of Project Caliban. The Bizarro connection. The episode never simply says, "This is Bizarro." Instead, it gives us a new interpretation of the character. B1. Z appears to be this show's version of Bizarro. He's a Kryptonian clone. He's physically similar to Superman. He's powerful. He's confused. He's childlike. But unlike many versions of Bizarro, this character isn't introduced as an evil Superman. He's introduced as someone who is taught to be good. And that's a huge difference. B1, Z's greatest enemy, may not actually be his own nature. It may be the people who want to control him. And Kara understands this better than anyone, because she was also treated like a weapon. Brainiac didn't care about Kara's feelings. He didn't care about her happiness. He cared about what she could accomplish. That's why Kara becomes emotionally attached to B1, Z's story. She sees herself in him. But there's one major difference. B1, Z had someone who taught him kindness. Kara didn't have that luxury. And that realization hits her hard. She was never given the chance to grow up normally. She was taught to conquer. She was taught to survive. She was taught to follow orders. B1, Z was taught that he had a choice. And Kara now understands exactly how important that choice is. The real threat. But then things take a darker turn. Something is still alive inside the facility. The heroes hear someone calling for help. They think someone is trapped. So they investigate. But it turns out to be a trap. A strange, white robotic creature emerges. It is fast, extremely strong, and capable of restraining Superman. This creature isn't B1Z. In fact, B1Z appears to have been hiding from it. The robot attacks the heroes. It uses the drone that had been monitoring the facility and essentially turns the machine into part of its own body. Now the creature becomes even more dangerous. Superman fights it, but the battle becomes increasingly destructive. The facility begins collapsing, and eventually, the robot activates a self-destruct sequence. 10, 9, 8. The heroes have only seconds to escape. 7, 6, 5. They run. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The facility explodes, and then the entire underground structure begins flooding. Superman's rescue. Lois, Jimmy, and Kara manage to escape, but Clark is missing. Superman is unconscious. Water begins rushing through the facility. For a moment, it looks like Superman could actually die. But then B1, Z appears. And this is one of the most important moments in the episode. B1, Z, he doesn't leave Superman behind. He saves him. He carries Superman out of the collapsing facility. And then he leaves. Not because he's afraid. Not because he hates Superman. But because he doesn't understand what else to do. Before leaving, B1, Z calls Superman his friend. That single word tells us everything. Despite his appearance, despite his strength, despite the fact that he was created in a laboratory, B1, Z isn't a monster. He's a child who wants a friend. The Halloween ending. The story doesn't end at the destroyed facility. Later that night, B1, Z reaches the city. It's Halloween. He's wrapped in a red piece of cloth, trying to stay warm. He sees children. He sees costumes. He sees people laughing. And eventually, he takes a lollipop from one of the children. It's a small moment, but it shows us that B1, Z, is discovering the world for the first time. Then he looks up, and he sees Superman. Not the real Superman. A Superman image displayed in the city. B1, Z looks at the symbol, and Binder's words play over the scene. Your life is yours to create. Your choices can change the future. Be good. Be kind. And that's the emotional conclusion of the episode. B1, Z now has a choice. He can become a monster. He can become a weapon. Or he can become a hero. And the fact that he looks up to Superman suggests that he may eventually follow Clark's example. That could be one of the most interesting storylines of Season 3. Clark and Lois ending. Meanwhile, Clark and Lois are back at home. Their conversation about the future hasn't been resolved. But they put the disagreement aside for Halloween. They're handing out candy together, and then a young child dressed as Superman comes to their door. The child looks at Clark with complete admiration, and the irony is obvious. The kid doesn't know that he's standing in front of the real Superman. Clark smiles. Lois smiles. And for a moment, everything feels normal. Then Kara watches them, and she pulls Jimmy closer. That small moment confirms that Jimmy and Kara's relationship is moving forward. So while Clark and Lois are trying to figure out their future, Jimmy and Kara may be beginning theirs. The shocking final scene. But then the episode gives us one final twist. We go to Lex Luthor. Lex is now working with Deathstroke, and they're watching footage from the Caliban facility. The drone that was destroyed during the battle belonged to Lex. So Lex has been monitoring the entire operation. He saw enough. He knows something escaped. He knows Project Caliban wasn't completely destroyed. But Lex isn't interested in recovering the drone. He's already thinking about something much bigger. Deathstroke asks about the next move, and Lex mentions someone named Hank Henshaw. Now this is where Superman fans should pay very close attention, because Hank Henshaw is one of the most important names in Superman mythology. In the comics, Hank Henshaw eventually becomes Cyborg Superman. And this episode gives us our first major clue that the series may be moving toward that storyline. Henshaw was already badly injured during the Brainiac conflict, and now we see him in terrible condition. His body is heavily damaged. He's connected to machines just to stay alive, and Lex sees that as an opportunity. To Lex, Henshaw isn't a person who needs help. He's a potential weapon, a perfect candidate for cybernetic reconstruction. And that is terrifying. Because imagine taking someone who already hates Superman and giving that person a body powerful enough to challenge Superman. That's exactly what Lex appears to be planning. What does the ending mean? So what does this mean for Season 3? First, B1. Z could become one of Superman's most important new allies. The show has taken the classic Bizarro concept and turned it into something surprisingly emotional. Instead of immediately making Bizarro evil, the series asks a much more interesting question. What happens if someone creates a powerful being but teaches him compassion instead of violence? B1. Z has the physical power of a weapon, but he has the heart of a child, and Superman may become his role model. Second, Kara's story is far from over. She has escaped Brainiac's control, but she still doesn't know exactly who she is. She sees B1, Z, and realizes that she was denied something he received. A childhood, a family, someone who taught her that she could choose who she wanted to be. That realization could push Kara even closer to Clark and the Kent family. Third, Jimmy and Kara are clearly heading toward a relationship. Jimmy is currently holding himself back because he thinks Kara deserves someone better. But Kara doesn't seem to agree. And considering how much time they're spending together, it's probably only a matter of time before Jimmy finally admits how he feels. Fourth, Clark and Lois are facing a completely different challenge. They love each other. That's obvious. But they have different ideas about the future. Clark wants stability. Lois fears commitment because of her past. So Season 3 could explore whether they can build a future together without forcing either person to become someone they're not. And finally, Hank Henshaw. This could be the biggest storyline of all. Lex Luthor is clearly looking for a way to create something that can challenge Superman. And Henshaw could become exactly that. If this series adapts elements of Cyborg Superman's story, we could eventually see a character who doesn't simply attack Superman physically. He could attack Superman's identity, his reputation, his relationships, his connection to humanity. And that's what makes the possibility so exciting. Overall, the Season 3 premiere is a strong opening because it balances three different stories. The first is Kara's emotional journey. The second is the introduction of B1Z. And the third is the setup for a much larger threat involving Lex Luthor and Hank Henshaw. The episode also does something this series has always done well. It takes classic Superman mythology and gives it a fresh, emotional interpretation. Bizarro isn't simply an evil Superman. He's a child searching for guidance. Kara isn't simply Supergirl. She's a survivor trying to discover who she is without Brainiac. Jimmy isn't simply Superman's best friend. He's someone who genuinely cares about Kara, but is afraid that he's not enough. And Lois isn't simply Superman's girlfriend. She's a woman trying to build a future without repeating the mistakes of her past. Even Clark isn't completely confident about what comes next. He wants a family. He wants a home. He wants a future with Lois. But he's slowly learning that you can't force people to move at the same speed you do. And that's why the title, Into the New World, fits the premiere so well. Every major character is entering a new phase of their life. Kara is free. B1, Z, is discovering the world. Jimmy is falling in love. Lois is confronting her fears. Clark is imagining a future. And Lex is preparing his next weapon. The heroes may think the Brainiac era is over. But the real danger could just be beginning. Because if Lex succeeds in transforming Hank Henshaw into something powerful enough to challenge Superman, then Clark may finally face an enemy who knows exactly what it means to be human. And unlike Brainiac or Kara's former enemies, this threat may not come from another planet. It may come from Earth itself. And that could make Season 3 much more personal than anything we've seen before. So what did you think of My Adventures with Superman Season 3 premiere? Do you think B1, Z will eventually become Superman's ally? Will Jimmy and Kara actually become a couple? And most importantly, do you think Hank Henshaw is going to become Cyborg Superman? Let me know your theories in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode 1 recap and ending explained, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because Season 3 looks like it's about to take Clark, Kara, Lois, and Jimmy into some seriously dangerous territory. What happens when Supergirl finally starts embracing her freedom, only to realize the person she cares about most may be pushing her away? What happens when Toyman returns with one of his biggest weapons yet? And most importantly, what happens when Lex Luthor unveils his answer to Superman? In the second episode of My Adventures with Superman Season 3, titled Mobile Suit Toyman, the series takes everything it established in the premiere and turns the pressure up. Kara is becoming more confident. Jimmy is becoming more confused. Lois is becoming more suspicious. And Clark is beginning to realize that being Superman isn't as simple as it used to be. But the biggest development comes at the end, because Lex Luthor finally reveals the weapon he's been preparing behind the scenes. A weapon that looks like Superman, but definitely isn't. Hank Henshaw has become Cyborg Superman. And if you thought Lex's hatred of Superman was already dangerous, this episode suggests that things are about to get much worse. So today we're breaking down the entire episode, including the Superfest chaos, Jimmy and Kara's heartbreaking conversation, Toyman's giant robot, the introduction of Jessica Cruz, and that shocking Cyborg Superman ending. Let's get into it. Part 1, Superfest begins. The episode opens with Supergirl already doing what she loves most, being a superhero. Kara is stopping criminals, rescuing civilians, and enjoying the attention she's getting from the people of Metropolis. And that's important because this is a very different Kara from the one we saw earlier in the series. For much of Season 2, Kara was trapped inside Brainiac's worldview. She was taught that strength meant domination. She believed Kryptonians were supposed to rule other civilizations. But after everything that happened with Brainiac, Kara is finally experiencing something she never really had before: freedom. And now she genuinely enjoys helping people. The episode then moves toward a major event called Superfest, where Superman and Supergirl are going to appear in front of the public. Kara is incredibly excited. In fact, she's already thinking about her superhero identity and even suggests another name for herself: Power Woman. Of course, nobody seems particularly convinced, but Kara doesn't care. She's having fun, and that's exactly what Clark wants for her. Clark plans to attend the convention as himself, while Kara appears publicly as Supergirl. Jimmy, meanwhile, has prepared something special. He gives the group custom communication watches. They're basically emergency devices that allow them to contact Superman if something dangerous happens. It's a funny moment because Jimmy's reasoning is actually pretty understandable. Every time these characters attend a public event, something goes wrong. So Jimmy wants everyone prepared. But there's another reason he's doing all of this. Jimmy still cares deeply about Kara, and he's trying very hard not to admit just how much. Part 2. Jimmy is pushing Kara away. Lois notices what's happening immediately. She knows Jimmy likes Kara, and she also knows Kara likes Jimmy. So naturally, Lois tries to push them together. But Jimmy refuses. His argument is that Kara has spent most of her life trapped under Brainiac's control. She hasn't experienced normal life. She hasn't explored Earth. She hasn't had the opportunity to figure out what she actually wants. And Jimmy thinks dating him might somehow prevent her from doing that. At first, this sounds incredibly selfless. Jimmy believes he's giving Kara freedom, but there's something else happening underneath. Jimmy is scared. He's afraid that Kara will eventually discover that she can do better. And instead of risking rejection, he's rejecting the relationship before it even begins. That's a huge part of Jimmy's storyline in this episode. He says he wants Kara to experience the world, but at the same time, he becomes increasingly uncomfortable when she actually starts doing exactly that. And that contradiction becomes very important later. Part 3. Jimmy's comic book empire. At Superfest, we discover another side of Jimmy. He's trying to turn his adventures with Superman into a business. Jimmy has created his own comic book material based on his experiences. And, of course, he's taking plenty of creative liberties. In Jimmy's version of events, Superman is basically a superhero celebrity. And Lois? She's the villain. Lois is understandably furious. Jimmy explains that conflict sells. Apparently, people love the idea of Superman and Lois being enemies who eventually become something more. The joke here is obvious. Jimmy's comics contain enough information that someone could potentially start connecting the dots. But nobody seems to realize how dangerous that could become. The show is basically making fun of the fact that these characters are terrible at keeping secrets. At the same time, Jimmy's comics reveal something about his personality. He's trying to build a career. He's trying to become financially independent. And he's trying to turn his connection to Superman into something of his own. But emotionally, he's still stuck. Part 4. Lois gets a new story. While Clark is enjoying the convention, Lois has another problem. She doesn't want to write some harmless article about Superfest. She wants a real story. And then she spots someone she absolutely does not trust. Winslow Schott, otherwise known as Toyman. For Lois, this isn't just some random toy merchant. She remembers what happened in the past. Toyman has previously used seemingly harmless toys as dangerous weapons. So when Lois sees him selling cute toys at a convention, she's immediately suspicious. Everyone else sees an old man selling toys. Lois sees a potential terrorist, and unfortunately for her, she lets that suspicion get the better of her. Part 5. Kara finally confesses to Jimmy, but the emotional heart of the episode is happening somewhere else. Kara and Jimmy finally have a serious conversation. Kara doesn't understand why Jimmy keeps treating their relationship like something that can't happen. She eventually tells him directly she has romantic feelings for him. Kara isn't subtle. She wants to know why they can't be together. She looks at Clark and Lois and sees a relationship that works. She wants something similar. But Jimmy gives her the same answer. He tells her that she needs to experience more of the world. Maybe there's someone else out there. Maybe there's something else that would make her happier. And Jimmy believes he's doing the right thing. But emotionally, this hurts Kara because from her perspective, she's finally found something she wants. And Jimmy is telling her she shouldn't want it yet. This is where the episode becomes more complicated. Jimmy says he's protecting Kara's freedom, but Kara is already making her own choice. She chose him, and by refusing to accept that choice, Jimmy is ironically taking away some of the agency he claims he wants to give her. That's why this relationship is becoming increasingly messy. Part 6. Supergirl's big moment. Kara then takes the stage at the Supergirl panel. And this is where the episode starts exploring another major theme: identity. Cat Grant asks Kara questions about what makes her different from Superman. And that question is actually pretty important. For a long time, Kara has been compared to Clark. Superman is the established hero. He's trusted by much of the city. He's the symbol people already recognize. Kara is the newcomer. And some people still remember what happened when she was under Brainiac's control. So Kara struggles to answer. Then a young girl in the audience speaks up. Her name is Jessica Cruz. Jessica tells Kara that Superman protects people, but Supergirl fights for them. And Jessica says she wants to be brave like Kara. That moment completely changes Kara's mood. For perhaps the first time, Kara realizes something important. She doesn't need to be Superman. She doesn't need to live up to Clark's reputation. She can be Supergirl. She can have her own identity. And that gives Kara a huge confidence boost. But then she makes a decision that will hurt Jimmy even more. She announces that she's open to meeting potential romantic partners. And suddenly, the woman Jimmy was trying to push away has plenty of people interested in her. Part 7. Jimmy gets jealous. This is where Jimmy's plan starts falling apart. Jimmy wanted Kara to experience the world. Well, she's doing it, and Jimmy doesn't like it. Suddenly, Kara is surrounded by admirers. People want pictures. People want autographs. People want dates. And Jimmy watches all of this happening. He starts realizing that maybe he doesn't actually want Kara to find someone else. He wants her, but he's already told her she should look elsewhere. That's the problem. Jimmy created this situation himself, and now he's upset about the consequences. The episode intentionally plays this for comedy, but there's genuine emotional conflict underneath it. Kara is becoming more independent. Jimmy is becoming more insecure, and their relationship is heading toward a breaking point. Part 8. The Whip attacks Superman. While all of this is happening, Clark has to leave the convention because another crime is taking place. And this time, Superman faces a new enemy, a villain called the Whip. Her weapon is powered by kryptonite. That immediately puts Superman at a major disadvantage. The Whip explains that kryptonite has become easier to obtain because of all the previous battles involving alien technology and Kryptonian weapons. This is another important consequence of the earlier seasons. The heroes may have saved the city, but their battles have left dangerous technology scattered around Metropolis. And now criminals are using it. The Whip is also hilarious because she can't understand why Superman works for free. Her philosophy is basically, If you're good at something, people should pay you for it. Superman disagrees. Eventually, her kryptonite weapon fails, allowing Clark to defeat her. But the encounter leaves Clark shaken. He returns to Superfest and admits that being Superman feels harder than it used to. And that's significant. Clark has always believed that doing the right thing is enough. But now he's facing a world where criminals are becoming more powerful, public opinion is complicated, and new threats keep appearing. Par neuf lois confrontement. Meanwhile, Lois continues investigating Toyman. She finds weapons hidden among his merchandise. But instead of immediately attacking him, Lois decides to manipulate him. She tells him that he's harmless. She basically suggests that he's washed up, that he isn't dangerous anymore, and that his best days are behind him. It works, because Toyman's biggest weakness isn't technology. It's his ego. He can't stand the idea that someone doesn't consider him a serious threat. So Toyman finally snaps, and this is where the title of the episode becomes clear. Toyman transforms his entire setup into a massive mechanical weapon. It's essentially a giant anime-style battle robot. The episode goes completely over the top here. It's a love letter to giant robot anime, superhero cartoons, and classic toy franchises. Superman and Supergirl prepare to fight, but then something unexpected happens. Someone else arrives, and that someone completely destroys Toyman's robot. Part 10. The arrival of Cyborg Superman. The person who destroys Toyman's robot is wearing something that looks very familiar. A Superman-inspired suit. But the symbol isn't the traditional house of L insignia. It's an L. The person inside the armor is Hank Henshaw. And this is where Lex Luthor's plan becomes clear. Hank was a military pilot who was badly injured during the previous alien invasion. Instead of allowing Hank to die, Lex rebuilt him. But Lex didn't simply save him. He transformed him. Hank is now a cybernetic super soldier, a weapon designed to look like Superman. This is the show's version of Cyborg Superman. And it's terrifying, because Lex understands something very important. He doesn't necessarily need to defeat Superman physically. He needs to defeat Superman's image. He needs humanity to believe that Superman isn't necessary. And Hank is the perfect weapon for that. Part 11. Lex's real plan. Lex appears in front of the press with Hank, and the message is simple. Humanity shouldn't have to depend on aliens to protect itself. That's Lex's argument. He wants people to believe that humans can build their own Superman. But there's a huge difference. Clark became Superman because he chose to help people. Hank has been turned into a weapon, and Lex controls the machine. At least for now. This creates an extremely interesting contrast. Clark represents Superman as a symbol of hope. Hank represents Superman as a symbol of power. And Lex wants humanity to choose power. That's what makes this threat different from Brainiac. Brainiac wanted to conquer Earth. Lex wants to control the narrative. He wants to convince humanity that his Superman is better. Part 12. Why Hank Henshaw matters. For longtime DC fans, Hank Henshaw is a massive character. In the comics, Cyborg Superman becomes one of Superman's most dangerous enemies. And the show's version is clearly setting up something similar. But there's another detail that makes this even more interesting. Hank isn't just some random robot. He was a human being. He was a soldier. He fought to protect Metropolis. He survived something horrific. And now Lex has given him another chance at life. But what cost? That's the tragedy. Hank may genuinely believe that he's doing the right thing. He may believe that Superman is dangerous. He may believe that humanity needs protection, and Lex is giving him a purpose. That makes him much more dangerous than a simple mindless machine. Because eventually, Hank may start asking questions. Who am I? Why am I doing this? Am I protecting humanity? Or am I just Lex Luthor's weapon? And when Hank eventually realizes the truth, Lex could have a major problem on his hands. Part 13. Kara's fear returns. After seeing Hank, Kara becomes worried. She asks Clark whether Lex is afraid of him, and Clark gives her an optimistic answer. He tells Kara that people were afraid of him when he first arrived too. But things changed, and if they continue doing the right thing, people will eventually understand them. It's a classic Superman philosophy. Clark believes actions matter more than fear. But Kara isn't completely convinced, because she has already experienced what happens when people fear her. She was manipulated by Brainiac. She became a conqueror, and even though she has changed, she knows the world remembers what happened. So seeing Lex present a human-made Superman is particularly disturbing for her. Because Lex isn't simply attacking Superman. He's attacking the idea that Superman deserves to be trusted. Part 14, What Happened to Bizarro? There's another fascinating detail hidden in the episode. Bizarro is actually around during the convention. But when Cyborg Superman appears, Bizarro runs away. And that reaction tells us a lot. Bizarro is still trying to understand who he is. He's essentially a child. He was created artificially, raised in isolation, and then inspired by Superman. He wants to be good. He wants to be a hero. But now he sees another Superman-like figure who appears to be violent and dangerous. That could be incredibly confusing for Bizarro. If Superman can have an evil version, then what does that make Bizarro? Is he destined to be Superman's enemy? Or can he choose his own path? That's one of the most interesting questions Season 3 is building toward. Part 15, Jessica Cruz Explained. We also need to talk about Jessica Cruz. Her appearance is brief, but it is absolutely not random. Jessica is a major DC character who eventually becomes a Green Lantern, and the episode deliberately introduces her as an ordinary girl. She doesn't have her powers yet. She isn't wearing a Green Lantern costume. She isn't fighting aliens. She's simply a young fan who looks up to Supergirl, and that's actually perfect, because Kara's story is about identity. Jessica's introduction suggests that Kara could become an inspiration for someone who will eventually become another superhero. And this is especially interesting because Jessica is expected to play a major role in the future of this animated universe. So this little moment at the Superfest may be much more important than it initially appears. Part 16, The Ending Explained. Now, let's break down the ending. Lex and Hank are back at their facility. Lex is pleased. The Toyman incident gave Hank exactly the public demonstration he needed. Hank destroyed a giant robot. He looked powerful. He looked heroic. And most importantly, he looked human-made. That's the image Lex wanted. Lex doesn't want people asking, "Can Superman save us?" He wants them asking, "Why do we need Superman when we have Hank and Shaw?" And that's the real battle of Season 3. It's not just Superman versus Cyborg Superman. It's hope versus fear. Clark believes people can choose to trust each other. Lex believes people can be manipulated. Clark wants to inspire humanity. Lex wants to control humanity. And Hank is caught in the middle. Part 17, What Will Happen Next? So what does this mean for the rest of Season 3? There are several possibilities. First, Hank could eventually become independent. Lex may believe he has created the perfect soldier. But Hank is still a human being underneath all that machinery. He has his own memories, his own emotions, and his own sense of justice. If Hank discovers that Lex manipulated him, their relationship could completely collapse. Second, Hank could become obsessed with defeating Superman. And that's where the Cyborg Superman mythology becomes especially interesting. The more Hank fights Superman, the more he could begin to see Clark as the source of all his problems. Third, Lex could use Hank to change public opinion. And that may be even more dangerous than simply attacking Superman. Because Superman can't punch an idea. He can't fly faster than propaganda. He can't heat vision public opinion into submission. He has to prove himself through his actions. And that's exactly the kind of conflict this show does extremely well. Overall, Mobile Suit Toyman is a very strong second episode because it balances comedy, romance, superhero action, and long-term storytelling. The Jimmy and Kara storyline gives the episode its emotional conflict. Kara is finally becoming her own person. Jimmy wants her to be free, but he doesn't know how to deal with the consequences. Lois continues to be the team's investigative force. Toyman provides the ridiculous giant robot action. Jessica Cruz gives us a glimpse of the wider DC universe. And then Cyborg Superman completely changes the stakes. What I especially like is that Hank isn't introduced as just another villain. He's introduced as an alternative. Lex is basically telling Metropolis, you don't need Superman anymore. And that's a much more dangerous message than simply saying Superman is evil. Because if enough people believe it, Clark could find himself fighting a battle he can't solve with his fists. Meanwhile, Kara's confidence is growing. Bizarro is still searching for his identity. Jimmy is dealing with feelings he refuses to acknowledge. And Jessica Cruz has just taken her first step toward becoming something much bigger. And then there's Hank Henshaw, the man who was once a hero, now wearing a corrupted version of Superman's symbol. And if the series follows even part of the classic Cyborg Superman story, this is only the beginning. What happens when Jimmy Olsen gets turned into a human spaghetti monster? Supergirl enters the dating world. Lois Lane starts questioning her future with Clark, and Lex Luthor's Cyborg Superman begins to realize that he may not be the one in control. Well, somehow, My Adventures with Superman manages to put all of that into one episode. Season 3, Episode 3, All's Fair in Love and WRMS, takes the series in a surprisingly funny direction while quietly setting up some very serious problems for Superman and the people around him. We get romance. We get jealousy. We get a giant villain. We get Cyborg Superman becoming increasingly unstable. And most importantly, we get a deeper look at one of the biggest questions facing Lois Lane. What happens when the future you want is also the future you're afraid of? By the end of this episode, Jimmy and Kara finally begin to understand what they actually want. Lois opens up about her fears, and Lex proves that Hank Henshaw is nothing more than a weapon on a leash. And there's also a very interesting tease involving a certain dog that Superman may be about to bring home. So let's break down everything that happened in My Adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 3. Explain the ending, and look at what this episode could mean for the rest of the season. Part 1. Jimmy Olsen has a new plan. The episode begins with Jimmy Olsen receiving a very strange invitation. He is invited to an event organized by the World Organization for Romantic Matchmaking Science, better known as WRMS. The organization claims that science can help people find true love, and Jimmy immediately decides that this is exactly what he needs. But the truth is pretty obvious. Jimmy isn't really interested in finding love. He's trying to make Kara jealous. Remember, in the previous episode, Jimmy told Kara that she needed to experience more of the world before committing to a relationship with him. He believed that Kara had spent most of her life under Brainiac's control and therefore hadn't experienced enough of Earth. Jimmy convinced himself that pushing her away was the right thing to do. But now Kara has actually listened to him, and she's dating a lot. Jimmy is starting to realize that his brilliant plan may have completely backfired. Lois immediately sees what's happening. She basically tells Jimmy, just ask Kara out. But Jimmy refuses. Instead, he decides to go to the WRMS event and surround himself with attractive people. His logic is simple. If Kara sees Jimmy having fun with other women, maybe she'll get jealous. The problem? Kara is a Kryptonian, and Kryptonians apparently don't play by normal human dating rules. Part 2. Lois has her own problem. While Jimmy is busy playing relationship games, Clark is thinking about something completely different. He's still thinking about the farmhouse. Earlier, Clark talked about building a future with Lois. A house, a dog, maybe children, a normal family life. Clark even bought a miniature model of the farmhouse, and he genuinely loves the idea. But Lois isn't ready. She loves Clark. That's never really been the question. The problem is the future. Lois has spent her entire childhood moving from place to place because of her father's military career. Her relationship with her parents was complicated. She saw what happened when people became trapped in responsibilities and obligations. So when Clark starts talking about settling down, Lois doesn't hear. Let's build a happy life together. She hears, everything is about to change, and change scares her. This becomes one of the most important emotional storylines of the episode, because Clark isn't trying to pressure her. He genuinely wants a future with Lois. But Lois isn't ready to decide what that future looks like. And this episode makes it clear that she doesn't want to lose the life they currently have. The adventure, the excitement, the freedom, the unexpected missions. She doesn't want their relationship to become something small and predictable. And that fear is going to matter. Part 3. Cyborg Superman's first warning. Meanwhile, something much darker is happening across Metropolis. Hank Henshaw is becoming increasingly dangerous. At the beginning of the episode, Hank stops a thief. But he doesn't simply stop him. He beats him. Badly. Hank believes that Superman isn't tough enough. He believes criminals deserve punishment. And because Hank has incredible power, he thinks he's qualified to decide what that punishment should be. This is exactly what Lex Luthor wants. Lex doesn't want another Superman who inspires people. He wants a Superman who scares people. A weapon, a symbol of human power. But Hank doesn't completely understand his role yet. He thinks he's the hero, and that's what makes him dangerous. Hank genuinely believes that he is doing the right thing. But there is one problem. He doesn't understand restraint. Superman does. And that's the fundamental difference between Clark and Hank. Clark has the power to destroy almost anyone, but he chooses not to. Hank has the power to destroy almost anyone, and he's beginning to enjoy using it. Part 4. Kara enters the dating world. While Jimmy is trying to make Kara jealous, Lois decides to take things one step further. She introduces Kara to a dating app. And this is hilarious because Kara has almost no idea how to answer normal human dating questions. Favorite movie? She doesn't know. Favorite book? She doesn't know. Mountains or ocean? Pass. Favorite hobbies? Basically nothing. Kara has spent most of her life fighting wars, traveling through space, and serving Brainiac. She hasn't had time to develop normal Earth interests. So Lois decides that before Kara can find a partner, she needs to discover herself. They go out into Metropolis. They visit stores. They listen to music. They explore the city. And Kara starts realizing something important. Earth is enormous. There are countless possibilities. She doesn't have to immediately decide who she is. She can discover herself. And this directly connects to the larger theme of the episode. The future isn't something you have to know immediately. Sometimes you have to experience life first. Part 5. Jimmy meets Gigi. At WRMS, Jimmy meets a woman named Gigi. At first, Jimmy thinks everything is going perfectly. She's interested in him. She's fascinated by his experiences, especially his exposure to Kryptonian technology and kryptonite. But something feels strange. Gigi isn't interested in Jimmy in the normal romantic sense. She's interested in his biology. She wants to know how Kryptonian radiation affected his body. And before Jimmy realizes what's happening, she's experimenting on him. Suddenly, Jimmy's body starts changing. His skeleton becomes unstable. His body stretches, and he basically turns into living spaghetti. It's one of the weirdest transformations in the entire series. And Jimmy's response is basically, "This is not how my date was supposed to go." But the situation gets even worse. Because Gigi isn't simply a strange scientist. She's actually the mysterious villain known as the Distortionist. And when she reveals her true identity, she's Giganta. Part 6, The Distortionist Revealed. Giganta has been responsible for the mysterious genetic mutations happening around Metropolis. And now Jimmy is her newest experiment. She wants to change him, make him bigger, stronger, more suitable for her idea of romance. The problem is that Jimmy isn't interested. He tries to escape, but Giganta isn't taking no for an answer. And this is where the episode's comedy turns into a real superhero fight. Giganta grows larger and grabs Jimmy. She becomes enormous. She climbs the Daily Planet building. And suddenly, Jimmy Olsen is basically being carried around by a giant supervillain. Clark obviously can't ignore this. So Superman arrives. But there's a problem. Giganta is still holding Jimmy. Superman can't simply attack her because he could hurt Jimmy. So Clark has to find another solution. And surprisingly, the WRMS scientists end up helping him. They use their technology to reverse the transformation. Giganta returns to normal, and Superman saves Jimmy. But there's an important joke at the end. Giganta immediately becomes interested in Superman, because apparently, almost every woman who meets Superman ends up falling for him. Clark politely rejects her, because, unlike Jimmy, Clark is already very clear about who he wants. Loi. Part 7. Cyborg Superman goes too far. While Jimmy's romantic disaster is happening, Hank Henshaw is creating a much bigger problem. Hank encounters criminals who are stealing technology. Among them is Silver Banshee and her group. Superman arrives. And what does Hank do? He wants to destroy them. Not arrest them. Not stop them. Destroy them. Superman tries to convince Hank that this isn't how heroes operate. Hank doesn't listen. The situation becomes chaotic. And eventually, Hank is remotely shut down. This is when we finally understand something very important. Hank may look like Superman. He may have Superman-level power. He may even believe he's a hero. But he isn't free. Lex controls him. Lex has installed a kill switch. And when Hank becomes too dangerous, Lex simply turns him off. That is the moment Hank realizes the truth. He isn't Superman. He's Lex Luthor's weapon. Part 8. Lex's biggest mistake? Lex believes he's completely in control. But Hank is becoming more independent. And that's dangerous. Because Hank doesn't want to be somebody else's machine. He wants recognition. He wants respect. He wants to be the hero. But Lex wants him to be a symbol of human superiority. That's why Lex becomes angry when Hank starts behaving violently. It actually damages the propaganda campaign. Lex wants people to look at Cyborg Superman and think, this is our hero. But if Hank starts killing people, the public will simply see another dangerous, superpowered monster. And that's exactly what Lex is trying to avoid. Ironically, Hank's aggression could make Superman look better. Because when people compare the two, Superman shows restraint. Hank shows brutality. And that's a problem for Lex. Part 9. Lois and Kara's musical moment. One of the most interesting parts of the episode is the conversation between Lois and Kara. Kara encourages Lois to embrace the future. But Lois keeps saying she's happy with the present. And Kara doesn't completely understand. For Kara, the future is exciting. She spent years trapped under Brainiac. Now she can choose. She can explore. She can experience music. She can date. She can become whoever she wants. Lois sees the future differently. To Lois, the future means losing something. She worries that if she settles down with Clark, the adventurous life they've built together will disappear. And the episode expresses this beautifully through their musical sequence. Kara essentially tells Lois, the future is limitless. But Lois responds with fear. She doesn't want to rush. And honestly, this is one of the strongest emotional moments of the episode. Because Lois isn't rejecting Clark. She's rejecting the idea that she has to decide everything right now. Part 10. The big conversation between Clark and Lois. Eventually, Lois tells Clark the truth. She's scared. She wants the farmhouse. She wants the possibility of a family. She loves Clark, but she doesn't want to lose the version of their relationship that exists right now. Clark finally understands. And instead of getting angry, he listens. That's important. Clark realizes that his dream isn't automatically Lois's dream on the same timeline. So he tells her they don't have to rush. They can move at her pace. And suddenly, the conflict disappears. Not because they solved their entire future, but because they stopped trying to force the answer. This is actually a very mature moment for their relationship. Clark doesn't say, then you don't love me. And Lois doesn't say, I never want a future with you. Instead, they say, we're okay right now. And sometimes that's enough. Part 11. Jimmy finally gets honest. Meanwhile, Kara has been getting tons of attention. She receives dozens of potential matches. Jimmy? Not so much. He gets one, and apparently, that one is gigantic, which is probably not what he expected. But the important thing is that Jimmy finally starts realizing what he's been doing. He wanted Kara to explore the world. She did. Now she's actually exploring it. And suddenly, Jimmy misses her. He misses hanging out with her. He misses watching television together. He misses the simple moments. And that's the irony. Jimmy wanted Kara to discover what else was out there. But he never considered that she might discover something better. And now he's jealous. The episode doesn't completely resolve their relationship. Instead, it gives Jimmy and Kara a new beginning. Jimmy asks Kara out for brunch. Just the two of them. No dating up. No competition. No jealousy. No games. Just Jimmy and Kara. And that may be the first genuinely healthy step they've taken toward each other. Part 12. The Kryptonian dog tease. But there's another important moment near the end. Clark encounters a dog. and immediately he starts thinking about adopting it. He jokes about names like Bar Kent, and even starts thinking about the possibility of calling it Krypto. Now, this is clearly more than just a random joke. The series is heavily teasing the arrival of Krypto, and considering how important Kryptonian mythology has become in Season 3, this could become much more significant later. Clark has been thinking about building a family. Lois is nervous about the future, and now there's potentially a dog entering their lives. It almost feels like the universe is slowly pushing Clark toward the future he's been imagining. But whether Lois is ready for that future is another question. Part 13. What does the ending really mean? So let's talk about the ending. The biggest thing happening isn't actually Giganta. It isn't Jimmy, and it isn't even Hank. The biggest development is about choice. Almost every major character in this episode is struggling with the future. Jimmy wants Kara, but refuses to admit it. Kara wants to discover herself. Lois wants Clark, but fears commitment. Clark wants a family, but doesn't want to pressure Lois. Hank wants to be a hero, but is controlled by Lex. And Lex wants control over Hank, but may eventually lose it. Even Krypto represents a future possibility. That's why the episode works better than it initially appears. On the surface, it's a ridiculous romantic comedy with superheroes. Underneath, it's about characters trying to decide who they want to become. Part 14. Cyborg Superman is the real danger. And this is where I think the episode becomes especially important for the rest of Season 3. Lex believes Hank is his perfect weapon, but Hank is already questioning Lex. He doesn't like being controlled. He doesn't like being treated like a machine. And he certainly doesn't like being told, "I have the power." Lex has given Hank incredible abilities, but he also gave him something else: free will. And that could become Lex's biggest mistake. Because eventually, Hank may realize that he doesn't need Lex. He doesn't need Superman either. He may decide that he should be the one deciding what happens to humanity. And if that happens, Cyborg Superman could become much more dangerous than Lex ever intended. Overall, I think this episode does something very interesting. It looks like a light-hearted romantic comedy, but underneath the humor is setting up some serious conflicts. Jimmy and Kara's relationship is getting closer to a real confession. Lois and Clark are learning how to communicate about their future. Kara is finally becoming comfortable with her independence. And Hank Henshaw is slowly becoming one of the biggest threats in Metropolis. The Giganta storyline is fun and ridiculous, exactly the kind of weird superhero adventure that fits this series. But the Cyborg Superman storyline is where the real danger is. Because Superman's greatest enemy isn't necessarily someone stronger than him. It may be someone who looks exactly like him. Someone who represents everything Superman could become if he stopped believing in compassion and restraint. And that's what makes Hank so interesting. Clark's greatest strength isn't his Kryptonian power. It's his ability to choose kindness. Hank has the same power, but he's making very different choices. So, My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 3 gives us romance, comedy, Giganta, Cyborg Superman, Lois and Clark's biggest relationship conversation yet, and a very suspicious dog who may be Krypto. But the real question going forward is, how long can Lex Luthor control Hank Henshaw before Cyborg Superman turns against him? And just as importantly, will Jimmy finally stop playing games and actually tell Kara how he feels? Because Kara is no longer the same person she was when she arrived on Earth. She's discovering freedom, she's discovering love, and she's discovering who she wants to be. Meanwhile, Lois and Clark are learning that having a future doesn't mean they have to rush toward it. And if that dog really is Krypto, Clark Kent may be getting the family he's always dreamed about much sooner than he expected. What did you think of this episode? Was Jimmy right to push Kara away? Do you think Jimmy and Kara will actually become a couple? And do you think Lex will eventually lose control of Cyborg Superman? Let me know your theories in the comments. What if Superman finally discovered the future he was fighting for, only to learn that, in that future, he and Lois were already dead? That is the massive twist at the end of My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 4. This episode takes the series in a surprisingly emotional direction. At first, it looks like a fun story about Lois trying to figure out her future, Kara dealing with her new life on Earth, and Clark attempting to enjoy a simple date. But then a mysterious boy appears. He knows Clark, he knows Lois, he knows Jimmy, he knows Kara, and most importantly, he claims to be Clark and Lois' son from the future. His name is John Kent, and before the episode ends, John reveals something horrifying. In his future, Clark and Lois are dead. So what happened? Why did John travel back in time? Who killed Superman and Lois? And is John actually here to save his parents from the future? Let's break down my adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 4, including the biggest character moments, the Cyborg Superman storyline, the Sabrina-Osuri conflict, John Kent's arrival, and that shocking ending. Spoilers ahead. The episode begins with Lois facing the future. The episode begins with Clark and Lois preparing for brunch. But this isn't exactly a normal morning. Lois is nervous, and we quickly understand why. Clark has been thinking about their future together. The farm, a house, maybe children, maybe even a dog. And Clark has already purchased a miniature model of the farmhouse they could potentially live in someday. For Clark, it's adorable. For Lois, it's complicated. She loves Clark. She loves their relationship. She loves the adventures they have together. But the idea of committing to an entirely different life scares her. Lois doesn't want their relationship to become smaller. She doesn't want the excitement they have now to disappear. And that becomes one of the episode's major themes. Is growing up the same thing as giving something up? Clark sees the future as something exciting. Lois sees it as something unpredictable. And neither of them is necessarily wrong. Clark wants to build something permanent with Lois. Lois wants to make sure that permanence doesn't destroy everything she loves about their current life. And while they're dealing with that problem, a much bigger future is already heading toward them. John Kent arrives. Clark and Lois finally make it to their brunch. Everything seems normal, until a young boy suddenly approaches them. And then he casually calls them Mom and Dad. Clark and Lois are completely confused. The boy introduces himself as John Kent. He claims he's their son. Not their son right now. Their son from the future. And John is absolutely thrilled to meet them. In fact, he's almost too excited. He wants to know everything. Where do they hang out? What's their favorite movie? Why does Clark wear glasses? And then he casually reveals that he has Kryptonian abilities. He even demonstrates his own version of X-ray vision. That's when things become much harder to dismiss. Because this kid knows things he should know. And he isn't only familiar with Clark and Lois. He recognizes Jimmy as his uncle. He recognizes Kara as his aunt. And suddenly the entire team is forced to confront an incredible possibility. This could actually be Superman's future son, Loi Panique. But there's one person who doesn't react with excitement. Loi. Because while Clark is fascinated by the idea that he could have a son someday, Lois realizes what this means. She's suddenly looking at proof that her future might actually contain everything she's afraid of. Marriage, family, children, a permanent life. And now that future isn't just an abstract possibility. It's standing right in front of her. John calls her mom, and Lois essentially has an existential crisis. She doesn't know whether she can be somebody's mother. She doesn't know whether she's ready. And most importantly, she doesn't know what happened between the present and John's future. Because if John really exists, then every decision Clark and Lois make from this point forward could potentially lead toward that future, or away from it. Kara gets a glimpse of her future family. Kara, meanwhile, is completely fascinated. She discovers that John considers her his aunt, and according to John, the group eventually becomes an incredibly close family. Kara is thrilled. She wants to know what the future looks like. What happens to humanity? What happens to Kryptonians? What happens to Superman? But John isn't giving them the whole story yet, and that becomes important, because he's clearly hiding something. At the same time, Kara is still dealing with her own dating situation. She's receiving an absurd number of messages from potential suitors. The dating app has practically stopped functioning because of how many people are interested in Supergirl. And Jimmy is still caught in the middle of this ridiculous romantic situation. He wanted Kara to explore the world. He wanted her to meet other people. Now she's actually doing it, and he isn't handling it very well. The irony is obvious. Jimmy encouraged Kara to move forward, but now that she's actually moving forward, he's realizing that he might lose her. Cyborg Superman has a problem. While all of this is happening, the episode continues another major storyline: Hank Henshaw. Hank is now Lex Luthor's Cyborg Superman, but Hank isn't comfortable being Lex's weapon. In the previous conflict, Hank demonstrated just how dangerous he could become. He has Superman's appearance. He has incredible power. But unlike Clark, Hank doesn't believe in restraint. He believes power gives him authority. And Lex realizes that this is becoming a problem. So Hank approaches Lex and pretends to accept his position. He apologizes. He says Lex was right. He acknowledges that Lex is in charge. But Slade isn't convinced. He knows Hank is dangerous. And he knows Hank tried to attack them. Lex, however, believes he can control him. That confidence may become one of Lex's biggest mistakes. Because Hank doesn't actually want to be Lex's servant. He wants his life back. He wants control over himself. And he blames the aliens for what happened to him. Lex tries to manipulate him by redirecting his anger towards Superman. But Hank isn't buying it anymore. He tells Lex, essentially, that there is no partnership. There's only power. And Hank wants to climb that food chain. This is an important setup for what's coming. Because Lex believes Hank is his weapon. But Hank increasingly believes he should be the one holding the weapon. The Subterraneo Suri attack. Meanwhile, mysterious tremors are hitting Metropolis. Clark eventually discovers the cause. The city is being threatened by the Subterraneo Suri, dinosaur-like people living beneath the surface. And this is where John gets his first real opportunity to become a hero. Clark tells him to stay back, but John is eager to prove himself. He has inherited his father's powers, and he clearly wants to show Superman that he can help. The problem is that John initially approaches the situation exactly like a superhero. He assumes he can simply overpower the threat. But Clark teaches him something more important. You can't save people if they don't feel safe around you. That's a lesson John desperately needs. Because Superman isn't just about strength. It's about understanding people. It's about compassion. And that's exactly what Clark has spent his entire life learning. John reveals the future. Then John makes an incredible revelation. He knows the Subterraneo Suri, because in his future, humanity and these underground beings aren't enemies. They're allies. And apparently, John himself played a role in making peace between them. This completely changes the situation. Instead of fighting, John talks. He explains that he's from a future where humans and the Subterraneo Suri have lived peacefully together for decades. And suddenly the conflict disappears. The message here is incredibly important. John isn't here simply because he's Superman's son. He's proof that Superman's philosophy can actually work. Clark believes humanity and other worlds can coexist. And John comes from a future where that belief has become reality. That's why John is so excited about the present. He's seeing the beginning of the world he grew up in. To him, Clark isn't just his father. He's the beginning of everything. The future isn't something to fear. After the Subterraneo Suri conflict is resolved, John spends more time with his family. He hangs out with Jimmy. He interacts with Kara. He helps Lois with her story. And for a moment, Lois begins to feel better about the future. She realizes that the future John describes isn't necessarily terrifying. In fact, it sounds wonderful. John tells her that she's exactly the mother he imagined. That moment matters. Because Lois has been afraid that becoming a mother would somehow destroy who she is. But John doesn't see her that way. He sees her as someone inspiring, someone important, someone who helped shape his life. And Lois begins to understand that maybe the future isn't about losing yourself. Maybe it's about becoming more of yourself. Clark and Lois talk about John. Later, Clark and Lois finally have a private conversation. And this is one of the most emotional moments in the episode. Lois admits that she's scared, not necessarily because she doesn't want a family, but because she doesn't want to lose the life they currently have. Clark understands. He doesn't pressure her. He doesn't tell her that she has to become the woman John described. Instead, he reminds her that the future isn't predetermined. They can choose what happens next. And that's the heart of the episode. The future isn't a prison. It's something they create. John may come from the future, but that doesn't mean every detail of his life is guaranteed to happen exactly the same way. Every decision Clark and Lois make can change what comes next. And for a moment, Lois starts believing that maybe she can face the future. Then everything changes. But the episode doesn't let that happiness last. Because Clark suddenly receives an urgent call. Superman is needed. And when he arrives, something is very wrong. People aren't cheering. They're running. They're terrified. And the person standing in the middle of the chaos is Hank Henshaw, Cyborg Superman. Hank looks around at the people fleeing from him. He remembers when Metropolis loved Superman, when people cheered Clark's name. Now they scream, and Hank wants to know why. He turns towards Superman and essentially challenges him. If Superman wants to be the hero of Metropolis, then he needs to fight for it. This is the moment where the episode's two major storylines collide. Clark is building a future based on hope. Hank is building one based on fear. And then John sees Hank. His reaction changes immediately. The excitement disappears. The optimism disappears. Because John knows something Clark doesn't. The shocking ending. Clark asks John why he's here. And John finally tells him the truth. He wasn't sent back to the past simply to meet his parents. He wasn't sent back because he wanted to see Superman. He came because his parents are dead. John tells Clark that where he comes from, Dad is dead. And then he says something even worse. They both are. Clark and Lois are dead. John was sent back through time because he wants to save them. And then comes the final line. Clark asks, "Save us from what?" John looks toward the threat and says, "From him." The episode ends. What does the ending really mean? Now let's break down the biggest question. Who is him? The obvious answer is Cyborg Superman, Hank Henshaw. Everything in the episode points toward Hank becoming the central threat. He's already unstable. He already resents Superman. He already hates what Lex did to him. And now he's becoming increasingly independent. But there's an important detail. Hank may not necessarily be the final villain, because Lex created him, and Lex believes he can control him. That's dangerous. If Hank eventually breaks free from Lex's control, he could become something much worse than the weapon Lex intended. Why John's future is so important. John's arrival completely changes the stakes of Season 3. Before this episode, Clark was fighting villains in the present. Now he has to worry about something much bigger, the future. And the future is apparently bad enough that someone had to travel through time to stop it. That means the story is no longer just about protecting Metropolis. It's about protecting the future itself. And there's another fascinating possibility. John's arrival could actually change the timeline. Remember what Clark told Lois. The future isn't predetermined. But John comes from a future that already happened. So there's a paradox. If Clark saved himself and Lois, then the future John remembers may never happen. Which raises a huge question. Will John eventually return to a future that no longer exists? Or will the future adapt around the changes Clark and Lois make? That's potentially one of the biggest mysteries going forward. Lois' character arc just got much more important. This episode also completely reframes Lois' storyline. Earlier, Lois was afraid of commitment. She didn't want to think about marriage or children. She was afraid that building a permanent life would mean losing the freedom she currently has. But now she has met the person she might become a mother to. And John isn't some abstract idea. He's real. He's funny. He's awkward. He's powerful. And he genuinely loves her. So now Lois has a completely different relationship with the idea of motherhood. She isn't simply imagining what could happen. She's looking at evidence that it could actually be beautiful. But then the ending destroys that comfort. Because John's future isn't happy. His parents are dead. And suddenly Lois has another reason to fear the future. Not because she might lose her freedom, but because she might lose Clark, Jimmy, and Kara's story. There's also a smaller but important relationship storyline involving Jimmy and Kara. Jimmy told Kara to explore the world. She listened. Now Kara is moving forward with her life. But Jimmy is jealous. This episode continues showing that Jimmy's biggest problem isn't that he doesn't care about Kara. It's that he's afraid to admit how much he cares. He wanted Kara to find herself. But now that she's becoming more confident and independent, he's realizing that he could lose his chance. And Kara deserves better than someone who only recognizes her value once she starts walking away. The show seems to be deliberately pushing Jimmy toward a decision. Eventually, he's going to have to stop playing games. Kara's future role. Kara also gets another important lesson from John. She learns that the future isn't necessarily something frightening. Her relationship with the group eventually becomes deeply connected to the Kent family. And John's excitement about seeing her tells us something important. Kara doesn't remain alone. She finds a family on Earth. She becomes part of Clark and Lois' future. And that gives her character even more emotional weight. Because Kara arrived on Earth with almost nothing. Now she has people who love her. And John's existence proves that connection continues for years. Cyborg Superman versus Superman. The biggest superhero conflict is obviously building towards Superman versus Cyborg Superman. But this isn't simply going to be another physical fight. The ideological conflict is much more interesting. Clark believes power should protect people. Hank believes power gives you the right to control people. Clark sees Superman as a responsibility. Hank sees Superman as a symbol of strength. Lex sees Superman as competition, and the public is caught between them. That's exactly why Hank is so dangerous. He looks like Superman. He has Superman's powers, and he's willing to do things Clark never would. So the public could easily begin asking, which Superman is actually protecting us? That could become Lex's biggest weapon. The real meaning of the title. The episode's title and story ultimately revolve around one idea: the future. Lois fears it. Clark embraces it. Kara is curious about it. Jimmy avoids making decisions about it. Hank wants to control it. And John comes from it. Every major character is approaching the future differently. That's why the episode works beyond its superhero action. It's really about the fear of change. Lois is afraid that changing her life will destroy what she loves. Jimmy is afraid of committing to Kara. Kara is learning how to build a life on Earth. Hank is furious that his life was changed against his will. And John is terrified that his future will disappear. Everyone is struggling with the same question. How much control do we really have over what comes next? Overall, this episode is much more important than it initially appears. On the surface, it's a fun adventure involving dinosaur people, superhero family drama, and a time-traveling kid. But underneath that, the episode is laying down some major Season 3 developments. First, John Kent has arrived. Second, we now know that the future contains a catastrophic event. Third, Clark and Lois eventually become parents. Fourth, Cyborg Superman is becoming increasingly unstable. And fifth, the future John comes from maybe directly connected to Hank Henshaw. The episode also gives Lois one of her most important emotional arcs yet. She doesn't suddenly become completely comfortable with marriage and motherhood. Instead, she starts to understand why Clark sees the future as something worth looking forward to. And then the final scene reminds her that the future can also be terrifying. Ending explained. Final theory. So here's the biggest theory going forward. John didn't travel through time simply because he wanted to meet his parents. He came because something destroyed his future. Clark and Lois died. And whatever caused that catastrophe was powerful enough that John believed the only solution was to go backward in time and prevent it before it ever happened. His final warning points directly toward Hank. But I don't think the situation will be that simple. Hank may become the villain who kills Superman and Lois in John's timeline. Or Hank could be only one piece of a much larger conspiracy. Lex may believe he can control Cyborg Superman. But Hank has already demonstrated that he doesn't want to remain anyone's puppet. And if Hank eventually breaks free, he could become the very threat Lex was trying to prevent. That's the irony. Lex created Cyborg Superman because he wanted humanity to have a weapon against Superman. But he may accidentally create the monster that destroys the future. And John may be the only person who knows how bad things eventually become. Which means Season 3 has now transformed from a story about Superman fighting today's villains into a race to prevent tomorrow's disaster. And the most important question isn't simply, who killed Superman? It's, what happened to the world that made Jon Kent travel through time to save his parents? Because whatever the answer is, Jon has already seen it. And now Clark and Lois have to make sure that future never comes true. What if Superman's greatest enemy wasn't trying to conquer Earth, but was trying to erase Superman from the future completely? That's exactly where my adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 5 takes us. After the shocking arrival of Jon Kent, the son of Clark Kent and Lois Lane from the future, this episode immediately raises the stakes. Jon didn't travel through time just to meet his parents. He came back because, in his future, Superman is dead. Lois is dead. Kara is dead. And the world they once knew has been destroyed by one terrifying figure, Cyborg Superman, Hank Henshaw. But here's where things get even more complicated. Jon's mission wasn't simply to stop Hank. He was sent back by Lex Luthor. Yes, the same Lex Luthor who created Cyborg Superman. And that creates one of the biggest questions of the episode. Why would Lex Luthor send Jon back in time to save Superman from the very person Lex created? Today we're breaking down the entire episode, Jon's tragic future, Hank's final confrontation with Superman, Kara's emotional sacrifice, the shocking truth about Jon's powers, and that massive cliffhanger involving the future. So let's get into it. Part 1. Hank Henshaw declares war. The episode picks up immediately after the previous episode's cliffhanger. Hank Henshaw has completely abandoned any idea of being Superman's ally. He sees himself as the rightful protector of Earth. But there's one problem. He believes Superman stole his future. Hank tells Clark that he wasn't attacking Earth. He was defending his world from an invasive species. In Hank's mind, Superman wasn't a hero. He was the alien invader. And now Hank wants revenge. But then Jon reveals the horrifying truth. Cyborg Superman doesn't just destroy Superman in the future. He destroys the entire world. Jon explains that in his timeline, Hank and his drones eventually become unstoppable. They destroy civilization. They destroy Superman. And they destroy Lois. But Jon wasn't sent back randomly. Someone deliberately sent him. And that person was Dr. Luthor. That's right. Lex Luthor sent Jon into the past. And this completely changes how we should view Lex. Because if Lex created Hank, why would he later send Jon back to stop him? The answer may be that Lex eventually realizes Hank has become too powerful. Lex wanted a weapon. Instead, he created something he couldn't completely control. And Jon may be the only person capable of changing the timeline. Part 2. Jon's biggest secret. Jon finally tells Lois and Clark what happened in his timeline. He explains that his world is completely different. The world he comes from isn't the bright, adventurous world we're watching. It's a world that is already lost. And Jon has spent his entire life knowing that his parents are gone. Imagine meeting your parents for the first time and discovering that they are the happiest people you've ever seen. That's what happens to Jon. He sees Clark and Lois together. He sees their home. He sees their friends. He sees Kara. And suddenly, the future he's been living with feels even more painful. Jon admits that when he arrived, he didn't immediately want to reveal everything. He wanted to experience this world. He wanted to spend time with his parents. He wanted to know what it felt like to have a family. And that's one of the saddest parts of the entire episode, because Jon knows that his parents aren't supposed to survive. But now he has a chance to change that. And he decides he's going to save them. Part 3. Jon wants to save his father. Jon becomes determined to stop Hank himself. He tells Lois that she needs to stay behind. He tells her that he will save Clark. But Lois refuses to simply sit there. And this becomes an important moment for her character. Lois has spent much of Season 3 worrying about the future. She's afraid of commitment. She's afraid that her life will change. She's afraid of becoming a wife and mother. And now, she's suddenly looking directly at her future son. Jon is living proof that the future she was afraid of isn't necessarily something terrible. There's a family waiting for her. But Jon also reminds her that the future can be destroyed. So this isn't simply about romance anymore. It's about whether they can protect the life they're building. Part 4. Hank and Clark's final battle begins. Hank finally attacks. And this isn't the Hank we've seen before. This is Cyborg Superman completely unleashed. He tells Clark that he's faster, stronger, better. He believes his cybernetic body makes him superior to Superman. But there's something much deeper driving Hank. He's angry, he's jealous, and he's terrified. He sees Clark living the life he believes was stolen from him. Clark has Lois. He has friends. He has a family. He has people who love him. Hank doesn't. So Hank decides that if he can't have the future he wanted, nobody gets to have one. That's why his attacks become increasingly brutal. And then he turns his anger toward the people of Metropolis. Clark immediately realizes something. Hank isn't fighting Superman anymore. He's fighting the entire idea of hope. Part 5. Lex loses control. Meanwhile, Lex tries to shut Hank down. And this is where the relationship between Lex and Hank completely falls apart. Lex believes Hank is still his weapon. He believes he can simply press a button and control him. But Hank has had enough. He tells Lex that he wants his life back. He wants to know why Lex turned him into a monster. And Lex tries to manipulate him. He tells Hank that Superman is the real enemy. According to Lex, Superman is the reason Hank lost everything. But Hank isn't buying it anymore. He tells Lex there is no we. That line is extremely important because Lex's greatest weakness has always been his belief that everyone can be controlled. But Hank is no longer willing to be controlled. And now Lex has created a monster that doesn't recognize its creator as its master. Part 6. Hank attacks Metropolis. The battle becomes massive. Hank isn't simply attacking Superman. He's attacking the city. And Superman is forced to choose between fighting Hank and saving innocent people. Of course, Clark chooses the people. That's what separates Superman from Hank. Hank sees power as domination. Clark sees power as responsibility. Hank wants people to fear him. Clark wants people to feel safe. And even while being attacked, Clark continues trying to reason with Hank. He tells him that it doesn't have to end this way. But Hank doesn't listen. He wants Superman dead. And then comes one of the episode's most important moments. Hank sees John. He realizes that Superman has a son, and suddenly his anger becomes even more personal. Hank tells Clark that he wants to kill him in front of his son. That's when John jumps into the fight. Part 7. John versus Cyborg Superman. John believes he can defeat Hank, but Kara immediately realizes the danger. John may have Superman's abilities, but Hank has been fighting for years. He's experienced, he's powerful, and he's specifically designed to fight Kryptonians. John tries to use experimental kryptonite shielding. The technology gives him some protection, but it isn't enough. Hank is still too strong. And then John makes a decision that reveals how much trauma he's carrying. He tells Kara to stay away. He doesn't want her involved. Kara doesn't understand why, until John finally explains. In his future, Kara died, and she wasn't just his aunt. She was his teacher, his best friend, his family. She taught him how to use his powers. She taught him how to fight. She taught him how to be brave. She taught him that the world could still be kind. And then, she was gone. This is one of the most emotional reveals in the episode, because Kara suddenly realizes something. The young man standing in front of her isn't just Superman's future son. He's her student. He's someone she raised after the world collapsed. Part 8. Kara's choice. Kara tells John something incredibly important. She understands why he wants to protect her, but she refuses to abandon him. John is her family, and if he's going to fight Hank, she's fighting beside him. This is the moment John finally accepts that he doesn't have to carry the future alone. For most of his life, John has been trying to save everyone. But now he has Clark. He has Lois. He has Kara. He has the family he thought he lost. And together, they attack Hank. Part 9. The shocking secret about John. The battle reaches its turning point when Hank realizes something strange. Kryptonite is hurting Kara. It's hurting Clark, but it isn't affecting John the same way. Hank becomes confused. He asks, "Why isn't the kryptonite hurting you?" And then the truth comes out. John isn't fully Kryptonian. He's human too, because his mother is Lois. And this is a huge reveal for the episode. John's hybrid biology gives him an advantage that Clark doesn't have. He's strong enough to fight Hank, but he's also resistant to the kryptonite that weakens Kryptonians. Hank realizes what this means. John represents something he never expected. The future isn't purely Kryptonian. It's human and Kryptonian together. And that's exactly what Hank has been fighting against. Part 10. The future belongs to everyone. Hank tries to destroy John, but John finally understands something. Hank keeps saying that Superman stole his future, but John knows that's not true. The future doesn't belong to Hank. It doesn't belong to Superman. It doesn't belong to Kryptonians. And it doesn't belong to Lex Luthor. The future belongs to everyone. John fights back with everything he has, and eventually, Hank is defeated. The threat that destroyed John's future has been stopped, but the victory comes with a massive cost. Part 11. John must go home. John's time travel device begins running out of power. He knows he has to leave, and suddenly the emotional weight of the episode hits. Because John finally has what he's always wanted. His parents, Kutta, a family, a home, and now he has to leave them. He tells Lois and Clark that he wishes they had more time. And Clark tells him something incredibly powerful. John saved his life. John saved the city. And Clark is proud of him. But Lois has something even more important to say. She tells John that he's their future, and she isn't afraid anymore. The future she was terrified of is now standing directly in front of her, and she loves it. Part 12. John returns to the future. John says goodbye. He tells his parents he loves them, and then he disappears. But there's one thing John believes. The future will be different now, because Hank was defeated, because Superman survived, because Kara survived, because Lois and Clark survived, and because John himself now knows that his parents love him. He believes that when he returns, his future will be better. But the episode immediately gives us reason to question that assumption. Because time travel doesn't always work the way characters expect. Changing one event doesn't necessarily erase every threat. And that's where the final moments become incredibly important. Part 13. Clark's powers are gone. After John leaves, Clark realizes something is wrong. During the battle, he pushed his powers too far. And now, he can't feel them. His powers are gone. Superman's powers are gone. Clark is devastated. He tells Lois, "I can't protect us." And this is one of the most important moments in the entire season. Clark has always defined himself through his ability to protect people. But Lois gives him the answer he needs. She tells him that maybe they didn't save Superman. Maybe they saved Clark. And that's enough. Because Clark doesn't need to be Superman every second of his life. He's still Clark Kent. He's still Lois's partner. And he's still the person everyone loves. Part 14. The final cliffhanger. But then we cut to the future. And we see that the story isn't over. Someone has captured one of the renegades. And then we hear Jonathan Lane. That's Lois Lane's father. And the person speaking to him knows about John's attempt to travel into the past. He knows exactly what John tried to do. And he doesn't want John returning to the past. Then comes the chilling implication. The future isn't fixed. John may have changed something, but there are still forces trying to preserve the future that was supposed to happen. And this sets up the next major conflict. Ending explained. So what does the ending actually mean? The biggest question is, did John successfully change the future? The answer is probably yes, but not completely. John defeated Hank in the past. He saved Clark. He saved Kara. He saved Lois. And he returned to a future that should theoretically be different. But the final scene tells us that someone knows about his time travel. That means the timeline has consequences, and the people responsible for the future's destruction may still exist. More importantly, Clark losing his powers changes everything. Even if Hank is gone, Superman isn't necessarily going back to normal. Clark may have to learn how to live without his powers, and that could completely change the dynamic between Clark and Lois. What happens to Hank Henshaw? Hank's story is also fascinating. Hank believes Superman stole his future, but ultimately, Hank became the very thing that destroyed the future. He blamed Clark for everything, but the person who actually manipulated him was Lex. Lex turned Hank into cyborg Superman. He controlled him, he exploited his anger, and then he lost control of him. So Hank's downfall is really a tragedy about manipulation. He wanted to become Earth's hero, Instead, he became Earth's greatest threat. What does this mean for Jon Kent? Jon is arguably the biggest winner of the episode. For the first time, he learns what having parents actually feels like. He gets to experience a normal family. He gets to meet the younger versions of the people who raised him. And most importantly, he realizes that his future doesn't have to be predetermined. That's the central theme of his character. Jon comes from a future where everyone believed the worst had already happened. But Clarke teaches him something different. The future isn't fate. It's something you build. And that's exactly what Superman represents. Lois and Clarke's relationship. The episode also resolves a major emotional storyline for Lois. For much of Season 3, Lois has been afraid of the future. She didn't want to rush into marriage. She didn't want to lose the freedom she had with Clarke. She didn't want their relationship to become boring or predictable. But then she meets Jon, her future son, and suddenly she realizes something. The future isn't necessarily the end of adventure. It can be the beginning of another adventure. The farm, the family, the children, the future she was afraid of may actually be the future she wants. Overall, Season 3, Episode 5 is one of the strongest episodes of my adventures with Superman because it combines almost everything this season has been building toward. We get Superman versus Cyborg Superman. We get Jon Kent. We get future versions of the characters. We get Kara's tragic backstory with Jon. We get Lex's manipulation. We get the emotional resolution to Lois's fear of the future. And we get one of the biggest changes to Clarke yet. Superman may no longer have his powers. But the episode's most important message isn't about powers. It's about family. Hank believes the future belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it. Lex believes the future belongs to whoever controls it. Jon initially believes the future is something he has to fix alone. But Clarke and Lois teach him something completely different. The future isn't something you inherit. It's something you build together. And that's why Jon's final decision matters. He doesn't return to the future because he knows exactly what's waiting for him. He returns because he believes his family will be there. And that belief is Superman's greatest power. What happens when Superman loses the one thing that has always made him Superman? Not his costume, not his reputation, not even his identity, his powers. After the devastating events of the previous episode, Clarke Kent is left powerless, while Metropolis is forced to face a terrifying reality. Its greatest hero may never return. But instead of turning into a simple superhero episode, Season 3, Episode 6 takes that idea and pushes it into something much more personal. Clarke has to discover who he is without Superman. Lois has to prove that she doesn't love Clarke simply because he's the Man of Steel. Jimmy and Kara finally get pulled into the emotional mess they've been avoiding. And in the middle of all this, a very different kind of villain arrives. One who doesn't simply want to defeat Superman. She wants to change the entire city. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're breaking down my adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 6, including the Gala attack, Princess Marina Maru's shocking transformation into Dr. Poison, Jimmy and Kara's relationship, Clarke's identity crisis, and that emotional ending that leaves us wondering, who is Clarke Kent if he can no longer be Superman? Let's get into it. Part 1, A Powerless Superman. The episode begins after the massive battle with Cyborg Superman. Clarke survived. Metropolis survived. But Superman didn't come out of the fight unchanged. During the previous battle, Clarke pushed his powers beyond their limits while trying to protect everyone around him. And now, those powers are gone. That's where we find him at the beginning of this episode. Clarke is still physically present. He's still working with Lois and Jimmy. He's still trying to act normal. But underneath all of that, he's struggling. Because for Clarke, Superman isn't just a job. It's part of who he is. For years, Clarke has been able to solve impossible problems by becoming Superman. Someone is trapped. Superman saves them. A building collapses. Superman catches it. An alien invasion happens. Superman fights back. But now, Clarke can't do any of that. And that creates a huge emotional problem. Because Clarke has spent so much time believing that his value comes from what Superman can accomplish. Without those powers, he doesn't know what he can contribute. And that's why the episode's central question is so important. Is Clarke Kent enough on his own? The answer is obviously yes. But Clark doesn't believe it yet, and that's what makes his journey in this episode so interesting. Part 2. The Humanitarian Gala. Meanwhile, Metropolis is preparing for its annual Humanitarian Gala. And this isn't just any event. Superman and Supergirl have been nominated for an award because of everything they've done to protect the city. There's just one problem. Superman can't be there. Clark is obviously attending, but publicly, he is simply Clark Kent, and everyone is wondering whether Superman will appear. Jimmy tries to keep the mood light. Lois tries to support Clark, but it's obvious that Clark is uncomfortable, because this is supposed to be a celebration of Superman, and Clark is sitting there knowing that Superman may not exist anymore. There's also another important storyline happening at the gala. Kara is receiving an award, and Jimmy has decided to bring a date. Of course, after everything that happened with WRMS and his disastrous dating adventures, you'd think Jimmy would have learned his lesson. Apparently not. His date is Princess Marina Maru from Markovia. She's elegant, confident, charming, and seems extremely interested in Jimmy. At least that's what everyone thinks. And Kara immediately notices. Jimmy has brought another woman to an event where Kara is being honored. That doesn't exactly make things less complicated. The problem is that Jimmy and Kara have spent most of the season misunderstanding each other. Jimmy believes Kara moved on. Kara believes Jimmy moved on. Both of them are basically waiting for the other person to make the first move. And instead of communicating honestly, they keep dating other people. Classic Jimmy and Kara. Part 3. Lois and the competition. While Clark is dealing with his Superman identity crisis, Lois has a completely different problem. She's competing against reporter Vicky Vale. And Vicky isn't exactly friendly. She basically tells Lois that she's wasting her potential by staying with Clark. Vicky believes Lois needs to prove herself, and Lois accepts the challenge. Whoever gets the biggest scoop during the gala wins. This may seem like a smaller storyline compared to Superman losing his powers, but it becomes extremely important later, because Lois is once again trying to prove that she's good enough. She's already accomplished. She's already a great reporter. She's already won awards, but she keeps comparing herself to other people, and eventually someone calls her out on it. Silver St. Cloud, the host of the gala, gives Lois some surprisingly meaningful advice. She tells Lois that if you need an award to prove that you're enough, you'll never actually feel like you're enough. And that becomes one of the episode's biggest themes, because Clark is doing exactly the same thing. Clark thinks he needs Superman to prove his value. Lois thinks she needs awards and recognition to prove hers. Both of them are measuring themselves through external achievements, and the episode is slowly preparing them to realize that they don't need to. Part 4. The Gala Attack. But before anyone can have a quiet emotional conversation, things go completely insane. The gala is infiltrated by armed criminals. The security system is compromised. The exits are locked, and the attackers aren't simply there to steal money. They're targeting Princess Marina Maru. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a glamorous evening turns into a hostage situation, and Clark tries to help. But this is where his new reality becomes painfully obvious. He doesn't have his superpowers. He can't simply transform into Superman and stop everyone. He can't hear danger from across the building. He can't fly through walls. He can't overpower armed criminals. He's just Clark, and Clark gets shot. Thankfully, he's not killed, but he's taken out of the action and locked away. And this is incredibly important, because Clark is forced to watch other people become the heroes. Jimmy protects people. Lois helps the children. Kara protects the city. Everyone is doing their part, and Clark is stuck, for perhaps the first time in his life. Clark is forced to accept that he can't solve everything himself. Part 5. Princess Marina's Secret. Then comes the big reveal. Princess Marina Maru isn't simply a princess. She's actually Dr. Poison, and her plan is enormous. She believes humanity has destroyed the planet. Pollution, industrialization, environmental destruction, human expansion, and she wants to reverse what she considers humanity's damage. Her solution? Transform humanity. Dr. Poison intends to release her poison into Metropolis water supply. The result could change the population on a massive scale. And suddenly Jimmy's date isn't just awkward. She's a supervillain. The funniest part is that Jimmy realizes he has once again managed to date someone who wants to genetically transform him. At this point, Jimmy's dating history is basically a superhero survival challenge. But there's something more important happening underneath the comedy. Dr. Poison admits that Jimmy was never really the target. He was simply a way into the gala. She used his invitation and his relationship with WRRMS to gain access. Jimmy's hurt, but instead of becoming completely defeated, he finally starts being honest. And this is where the episode delivers one of its best character moments. Jimmy admits that he's already in love with someone. And that person is Kara. Not a dating app match. Not some mysterious scientist. Not another supervillain. Kara. The problem? Kara hears him. Part 6. Kara and Jimmy finally talk. This is the conversation the show has been building toward. Kara confronts Jimmy. She wants to know why he was willing to tell Dr. Poison his feelings, but never told Kara. And Jimmy finally explains himself. He thought Kara had moved on. He saw her dating other people. He thought she didn't want him anymore. Kara responds with something even more important. She says that Jimmy didn't ask, and that's the entire problem. Both of them spent the season making assumptions. Jimmy assumed Kara wasn't interested. Kara assumed Jimmy wasn't interested. So instead of talking, they played games. They dated other people. They tried to make each other jealous. And they kept pretending they were fine. But they weren't. The episode doesn't magically solve everything between them. Instead, it finally gets them to acknowledge the truth. They care about each other. And that's a major step forward. Because after everything we've seen this season, Jimmy's confession is probably the most honest thing he's said about his love life. Part 7. Kara saves the city. While Jimmy deals with Dr. Poison emotionally, Kara has to deal with the actual threat. Dr. Poison has already sent her people toward the Metropolis Dam. If they release the poison into the city's water supply, thousands, possibly millions, could be affected. So Kara makes a decision. She leaves Jimmy and goes to protect Metropolis. And this is another major moment for Supergirl. Remember where Kara started. She was originally unsure about Earth. She didn't understand human culture. She didn't understand relationships. She didn't understand what made humans worth protecting. Now, she's willing to risk everything for them. She's become a genuine hero. And that's exactly what her humanitarian award represents. Not just power, not just strength, but compassion. Kara saves the city, and she does it without Superman. That's important, because the world isn't completely helpless without Clark. Supergirl can protect Metropolis. Jimmy can protect people. Lois can protect people. And Clark can still make a difference. The episode is slowly dismantling Clark's belief that everything depends on Superman. Part 8. Clark Kent's lowest moment. After the attack, Clark finally confronts the truth. He looks at everything that happened. Kara saved the city. Jimmy defeated Dr. Poison. Lois protected the kids. And Clark? He got shot. He got locked in a closet. He couldn't transform into Superman. And Clark feels useless. He tells Lois that Metropolis needed a hero. And all he could give them was Clark Kent. That's an incredibly painful statement. Because Clark is basically saying, I'm not enough. And Lois gives him the perfect response. She tells him she loves Clark Kent. And that matters more than anything. Because Clark has been comparing Clark Kent to Superman. But Lois doesn't. To her, they're not two different people. They're both Clark. The person she fell in love with isn't the powers. It isn't the cape. It isn't the strength. It's the man underneath. And then Lois says something that completely changes the emotional direction of the episode. She tells Clark that he can't spend the rest of his life comparing himself to someone he might never be again. And that's the real battle Clark is facing. Not Dr. Poison. Not Cyborg Superman. Not Lex Luthor. His real enemy right now is his own belief that Superman is the only valuable part of himself. Part 9. Why the ending matters. The episode ends with Clark still struggling. He tries to figure out who he is now, because his powers haven't returned. And that means the next chapter of his life could be completely different. For the first time, Clark may have to build an identity that doesn't depend on being Superman. And that's fascinating because the show has spent so much time exploring Superman's identity. Who is he? Is he Kryptonian? Is he human? Is he Clark Kent? Is he Superman? Season 3 has gradually pushed that question further. And now the answer may be, he's all of those things, even without the powers. Clark's heroism has never really come from his strength. It comes from his choices. He chooses to help people. He chooses compassion. He chooses forgiveness. He chooses love. And those things can't be taken away by kryptonite. Part 10, my review of the episode. So what do I think of Season 3, Episode 6? Honestly, this is one of the more emotionally important episodes of the season. The action is fun. Dr. Poison is entertaining. Jimmy's disastrous dating life continues to provide comedy. Kara gets another opportunity to show how much she's changed. But the real strength of the episode is Clark, because stripping Superman of his powers could easily have been used as a temporary plot device. Instead, the episode uses it to ask a much deeper question. Who is Clark without Superman? And that's exactly the kind of question this series is good at exploring. There's also a nice parallel between Clark and Lois. Both characters are struggling with the idea of being enough. Lois wants recognition. Clark wants Superman. But neither of them actually needs those things to have value. They already matter to the people around them. And that's why Lois' conversation with Clark is so powerful. She doesn't tell him that his powers will definitely come back. She doesn't promise that everything will return to normal. Instead, she tells him that Clark Kent himself matters. That's much more meaningful. Part 11, Jimmy and Kara's relationship. The Jimmy-Kara storyline also finally moves forward. For most of the season, these two have been caught in a ridiculous cycle. Jimmy dates people because he thinks Kara is dating other people. Kara dates people because she thinks Jimmy doesn't want her. Neither wants to admit they're jealous. And both keep pretending everything is fine. But Dr. Poison accidentally forces Jimmy to say what he really feels. And Kara finally confronts him. The important part isn't necessarily that they're officially together yet. It's that they're finally communicating. That changes everything. And honestly, that's probably the healthier direction for their relationship. Because their biggest problem was never a lack of attraction. It was a lack of communication. Part 12, what happens next? And now we have to talk about where the season goes from here. Clark has lost his powers, but the threats haven't disappeared. Lex Luthor is still out there. Cyborg Superman has already proven how dangerous he can be. And the future revealed through John Kent has shown us that the stakes are much bigger than one battle. John came from a future where Superman and his allies were destroyed. He was sent back to change that future. And now that timeline has been altered. But altered doesn't necessarily mean safe. In fact, the final moments of this episode make it clear that there are still forces moving behind the scenes. The future is still unstable, and Clark's powers being gone could become a huge problem. Because if another major threat arrives, who will protect Metropolis? Kara can help, Jimmy can help, Lois can help, but Clark is still the symbol that everyone associates with Superman. And now that symbol has been damaged. That's exactly what makes the next stage of the season so interesting. Season 3, Episode 6 isn't really about Superman fighting a villain. It's about Clark Kent fighting his own identity crisis. The episode strips away his powers and forces him to confront something he's been avoiding. Clark Kent is not valuable because he's Superman. He's valuable because he's Clark. He's Lois' partner. He's Jimmy's friend. He's Kara's family. He's someone who inspires people even when he can't lift a car or fly through the sky. And that's what makes the final question so powerful. Clark asks, who am I supposed to be? And maybe that's the question the entire season has been building toward. Because Superman isn't defined by his powers. Superman is defined by what he chooses to do with them. And even without those powers, Clark still has the heart of Superman. What if the future isn't written in stone? What if the person you become isn't determined by destiny, your past, or even the worst things that have ever happened to you? And what if Superman's greatest power isn't actually flying, super strength, or even his Kryptonian abilities? In my adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 7, the series takes Clark, Lois, Jimmy, Kara, and several alternate versions of themselves and throws them into a bizarre cosmic competition hosted by none other than Mr. MXYZ PTLK. But beneath all the comedy, strange challenges, alternate universes and giant cosmic creatures, this episode is actually about something much deeper. Who decides who we become? Clark has lost his powers. Lois is terrified that every future she imagines keeps changing. Kara is forced to confront the possibility that she could become someone completely different. Jimmy meets a version of himself who has lost everything. And eventually, the entire group discovers that the so-called game isn't really a game at all. It's a test. And the final message could completely change how we understand the future of this series. So today, we're breaking down my adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 7, including the alternate versions of the characters, MXY's PTL case Real Plan, the Cosmic Anvil, why Clark's sacrifice matters, and that important final conversation between Clark and Lois. Spoilers ahead. Let's get into it. The episode starts after Clark's biggest loss. The episode begins immediately after the devastating events of the previous episode. Clark has lost his Superman powers. After everything that happened with Hank Henshaw and John's future, Clark realizes that something has changed permanently. He can't feel his powers anymore. He can't fly. He can't protect people the way he used to. And most importantly, Clark doesn't know who he is anymore. That's why the opening moments of this episode are so important. Everyone around Clark is trying to continue with normal life. They're heading to an awards gala where Lois and Jimmy are nominated for an award. Superman and Supergirl are also being honored for their heroic actions. But there's one huge problem. Superman isn't Superman anymore. Clark is still physically there, but the identity that defined him for so long is gone. And that creates a very interesting contrast. The city is celebrating Superman, while Clark is quietly wondering whether there's anything left of him without Superman. Jimmy tries to keep things light. Lois tries to support Clark, but Clark is clearly struggling. And this becomes the emotional foundation for everything that follows. The gala and Jimmy's love life. The group arrives at the humanitarian gala, and naturally, things immediately become complicated. Jimmy has brought another date from the strange dating app we've seen throughout the season. Her name is Princess Marina Maru, although she later reveals herself to be the villainous Dr. Poison. Kara is also attending the gala because she's receiving an award, and Jimmy's decision to bring a date becomes especially awkward because of his feelings for Kara. Remember, Jimmy has been trying to convince himself that Kara has moved on. He's been dating other people. Kara has been dating, and neither of them has been willing to openly admit what they actually feel. Meanwhile, Lois is dealing with her own rivalry. She runs into reporter Vicky Vale, who immediately starts provoking her. Vicky suggests that Lois isn't successful on her own and constantly needs someone beside her. That hits a nerve, so the two reporters turn the night into a competition. Whoever gets the biggest story wins. And once again, the episode establishes one of its central ideas. Everyone is trying to prove that they're enough. Lois wants to prove she's a great reporter. Jimmy wants to prove he's capable. Kara wants to prove she's worthy of a role. And Clark doesn't know what he's trying to prove anymore. The gala turns into a disaster. Things become suspicious when Lois notices that Princess Maru's security team isn't acting like normal security. They're armed guards. Communication systems are being redirected. Exits are locked. And then the truth comes out. Princess Maru isn't simply a royal guest. She's Dr. Poison. Her goal is to reverse what she calls the Anthropocene era. In other words, she believes humanity has destroyed the planet and that the only solution is to remove humanity's control over Earth. Her plan is to release a powerful poison into Metropolis's water supply. And now the heroes are forced to split up. Kara has to save the city. Jimmy has to deal with Dr. Poison. And Clark is basically helpless. That's one of the most painful parts of the episode. In the past, if something like this happened, Clark would immediately become Superman. But now, he can't. Instead, Clark gets shot and locked away. He has to watch other people become the heroes. And that hurts him deeply, because Clark has spent his entire life believing that his purpose was to protect people. Now, he's discovering that he can still make a difference without superpowers. He just hasn't accepted it yet. Jimmy finally admits the truth. Meanwhile, Jimmy finds himself face to face with Dr. Poison. And the funny part is that she completely manipulated him. She didn't actually like him. She used the date to gain access to the gala. Jimmy realizes he was basically a pawn in her plan. But instead of being completely destroyed by it, Jimmy finally admits something important. He's already in love with someone, and that someone is Kara. Dr. Poison assumes he's talking about her, but Jimmy finally says the name. Kara. This is a huge moment. Jimmy has spent so much time trying to hide his feelings because he thought Kara had moved on, but he wasn't actually over her. And later, Kara confronts him. She explains that she never stopped wanting to be with him. The problem wasn't that she stopped caring. The problem was that neither of them communicated. Jimmy thought Kara wanted to move on. Kara thought Jimmy wanted to stay friends. And both of them were wrong. Their relationship has been destroyed by assumptions rather than a lack of feelings. That makes their reconciliation much more meaningful. Lois gets her own lesson. At the same time, Lois is dealing with Vicky Vale. And eventually, Lois realizes that her obsession with winning isn't actually making her happy. Silver St. Cloud gives Lois some advice. She tells her that if you need an award to prove you're good enough, you'll never truly feel good enough. That's an important lesson for Lois, because Lois isn't supposed to become great because she wins awards. She's already great because of who she is. And that idea becomes extremely important later when the characters are forced to confront alternate versions of themselves. Enter MXYZPTLK. Just when the night couldn't get any stranger, MXYZPTLK arrives. And he's not alone. He's going through a divorce. His soon-to-be ex-wife is Miss Gispitlessness, who prefers to be called Glitzy. Instead of settling their divorce through normal legal proceedings, the two immortals decide to settle everything through a contest. And their contestants? Clark, Lua, Jimmy, Kara, and alternate versions of themselves. MXYZPTLK explains the rules. There will be multiple challenges. The teams need to collect keys. The keys will eventually lead them to the center of the realm. And whoever wins gets control of the game. But there's a catch. If the heroes lose, they may never return to their universe. And there's an even bigger problem. MXYZPTLK expected Superman to be on his team, but Clark has lost his powers. So MXYZPTLK basically considers him useless. He calls Clark a bumbling, useless, nearsighted reporter. And that's intentionally insulting, because the entire episode is about proving that Clark Kent isn't useless. The alternate team. Glitzy's team includes alternate versions of the heroes. There's an alternate General Lois Lane, an alternate Lex Luthor, an alternate Kara, and an alternate Jimmy. And immediately, we realize something is very wrong. This isn't simply a team of evil versions. These characters represent different possible futures. The alternate Kara is cold and militaristic. The alternate Lois is extremely aggressive. The alternate Jimmy acts like everything is fine, and their world has suffered tremendously. Their Superman is dead. The Hunger Dogs invaded. Their world collapsed. And instead of dealing with that trauma, Jimmy pretends everything is normal. He jokes. He acts excited. He celebrates his superhero identity. But underneath all of that is someone who is clearly broken. This is important because it shows us that alternate realities aren't simply good or evil. They're possibilities. Different choices can create completely different people. The first challenge. The first challenge looks simple. Both teams have to cross a dangerous bridge and collect a key. But flying isn't allowed, so Clark has to compete without powers. The teams race across the bridge, and although Clark struggles, his team manages to get the key. The problem? It's basically a tie, and MXYZPTLK is furious. He doesn't want a tie. He wants competition, because the game isn't actually about who wins. It's about getting everyone to collect those keys. That becomes important later. Savin Mountain. The next challenge takes place on Savin Mountain. The teams must climb to the top before the mountain sinks into the Manticore Trench. And if they fall, they get eaten. Simple. Meanwhile, Kara encounters her alternate self. And this is where the episode becomes much more serious. The alternate Kara looks at our Kara and essentially suggests that they're not that different. She talks about losing her parents, losing her world, wanting nothing except to work. Then she found Clark, She found friendship. She found love. But in her universe, Clark died. And everything changed. This forces our Kara to confront a terrifying possibility. What if she had made different choices? What if she had become like that version of herself? What if the only difference between them was circumstance? The answer becomes increasingly clear. Kara isn't defined by her past. She's defined by the choices she makes after it. The alternate Jimmy. Jimmy also learns something shocking. The alternate Jimmy reveals that Superman died in his universe. After that, the Hunger Dogs invaded. The world fell apart, and Jimmy became a superhero. At first, Jimmy acts like everything is great. He has a cool suit. He has powers. He jokes around. But our Jimmy quickly realizes something. This isn't happiness. It's denial. Alternate Jimmy is pretending that nothing changed. He's pretending that the loss didn't destroy him. And that becomes another major theme of the episode. Sometimes the future isn't scary because it's different. Sometimes it's scary because we're afraid to admit what we've already lost. The maze. The next challenge is a maze. The heroes are told to find their one true path. At first, that sounds simple, but then they realize the maze is showing them possible futures. And that's where Clark completely breaks down. Clark sees different versions of Lois, different versions of his life, and he starts asking the question, who am I now? He used to be Superman, but now his powers are gone. If Superman is gone, does Clark still have a purpose? And then he finally realizes something. There is no single path. There is no predetermined version of himself that he has to become. Kara's biggest moment. Kara also reaches a major realization. When she saw the alternate Kara, she feared that perhaps Brainiac was right about her. Maybe deep down, she was destined to become something like him. But she realizes that's impossible. Because people aren't just one thing. People change. People make mistakes. People learn. People become better. And that leads directly to one of the most important ideas in the entire season. The future belongs to everyone. Not fate. Not destiny. Not Brainiac. Not MXYZPTLK. Not even the people who claim they know what's going to happen. The future is shaped by choices. And that's exactly what John was trying to tell his parents earlier in the season. The truth about the Cosmic Anvil. Eventually, the heroes realize something strange. It doesn't matter who wins each individual challenge. The keys keep going to the same place. Both teams are collecting them. Both teams are helping unlock something. And then the truth is revealed. The entire contest is designed to gather keys for a device called the Cosmic Anvil. The Cosmic Anvil has the ability to reshape an entire universe. And MXYZPTLK and Glitzy need mortals to retrieve the keys because they're prevented by a magical curse from unlocking it themselves. So this wasn't really a divorce competition. It was a cosmic scheme. They've been manipulating the heroes into unlocking a weapon capable of rewriting reality. And now the heroes understand the real danger. The temptation. But MXYZPTLK offers them something impossible to resist. He says the winner can reshape the universe however they want. And for Lois, there's an obvious possibility. Clark could get his powers back. But Lois corrects him. She doesn't want Superman back. She wants Clark back. Because losing Clark was worse than losing Superman. That line tells us everything about Lois's character. She doesn't love Clark because he's Superman. She loves Clark because he's Clark. And that's exactly what Clark has been struggling to understand. Clark's choice. The heroes realize that MXYZPTLK can't be trusted. But the temptation remains. What if they could fix everything? What if they could bring Clark's powers back? What if they could restore the futures that were lost? What if they could rewrite reality so none of these tragedies ever happened? But then MXYZPTLK reveals the real consequence. The losers won't simply go home. They'll become gifts for Glitzy. Essentially, they'll be destroyed. And the heroes refuse. MXYZPTLK threatens them. He tells them to play or die. And Clark finally makes his choice. He doesn't fight. He doesn't beg. He doesn't try to manipulate the rules. He simply stands there and tells MXYZPTLK that if he wants to kill them, then do it. This is Clark's biggest heroic moment in the episode. Because Superman isn't making the choice. Clark Kent is. Why Clark's sacrifice works. MXY's PTLK believes Clark is weak because he has no powers. But that's exactly why Clark wins. MXY's PTLK expects Clark to behave like Superman. Instead, Clark behaves like Clark. He refuses to participate in a game that would sacrifice innocent people. And because the contest has no winner, MXY's PTLK's magical rules collapse. His seal remains unbroken. The cosmic anvil can't be activated. An entire scheme falls apart. MXY's PTLK loses. Not because Clark punched him, not because Superman used heat vision, but because Clark refused to play by his rules. And that's a perfect payoff to the entire episode. The final conversation between Clark and Lois. After everything is over, Clark and Lois wake up in their own world. And something has changed. Clark realizes he's actually beginning to like being Clark Kent. He says that maybe he's enough. And Lois agrees. But Lois is still worried. She says she thought she knew what their future was going to look like. But now it feels like every time they think they understand the future, something terrible happens. John showed them one future. Hank showed them another. The alternate universes showed them countless others. And now Lois is afraid that they can't control what's coming. But Clark gives her a completely different perspective. He tells her that these futures aren't necessarily terrible. They're simply different. And that may be the biggest message of Season 3 so far. Ending explained. So what does the ending actually mean? The episode isn't saying that the future doesn't matter. It's saying that the future isn't fixed. John came from a future where Superman died. He believed he had to travel back and change history. Hank came from a completely different path. The alternate characters showed us even more possibilities. And MXY's PTLK literally possesses the power to rewrite reality. Yet none of these things determine who Clark, Lois, Kara, or Jimmy have to become. They make choices. They adapt. They change. And that's why the cosmic anvil becomes such an important symbol. The anvil represents the fantasy of controlling everything. If you could rewrite reality, would you? Would you erase every tragedy? Would you bring back everyone you lost? Would you restore Clark's powers? Would you create a perfect future? The episode's answer seems to be, no perfect future exists. Because a perfect future isn't something someone gives you. It's something you build. What happens to Clark now? And then we have the biggest question going forward. Will Clark ever get his powers back? The episode doesn't give us a simple answer. And honestly, that's what makes the story more interesting. For the first time, Clark is being forced to discover who he is without Superman. He has spent years believing that Superman is his responsibility. But now he's discovering that being Clark Kent can also be heroic. He can save people through journalism. He can protect people through his relationships. He can inspire people. He can choose to do the right thing. And most importantly, he can love Lois without needing to be Superman. Kara's future. Kara's storyline is also incredibly important. Her alternate self represents the future she could have had. A future where Clark dies. A future where she becomes harder. A future where survival replaces compassion. But our Kara chooses something else. She chooses family. She chooses Jimmy. She chooses Clark. She chooses humanity. And that tells us that Kara isn't doomed to repeat the mistakes of her past. She can become someone new. Jimmy and Kara. And finally, Jimmy and Kara. Their relationship has been slowly building through the season. Both of them thought the other person had moved on. Both of them were dating other people. And both of them were pretending not to care. But this episode finally forces the truth into the open. Jimmy admits he's in love with Kara. Kara admits she never stopped wanting to be with him. So their biggest obstacle wasn't another villain. It was communication. And now, finally, they're being honest. Overall, My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 7 is one of the most creative episodes of the season. On the surface, it's a ridiculous cosmic game featuring MXY's PTLK, alternate characters, giant monsters, impossible challenges, and a cosmic anvil. But underneath all of that, it's an emotional story about identity and choice. Clark thinks losing his powers means losing himself. Lois thinks the future has already been written. Kara fears becoming the person she was always told she might become. Jimmy hides his pain behind jokes. And every one of them learns the same lesson. You're not limited to one future. You're not defined by your worst day. You're not defined by what happened to you. And you don't have to become the person someone else expects you to become. That's why the final line is so powerful. When Lois worries that they're constantly fighting against terrible futures, Clark tells her, "They're not terrible, Lois. They're just different." That line could become one of the most important ideas for the rest of Season 3. Because John came from a future where his parents died. Hank came from a future filled with destruction. The alternate heroes came from worlds where completely different choices were made. But our heroes are still here, and as long as they're together, they still have a choice. The future isn't something they're waiting to discover. It's something they're creating. And after everything we've seen this season, the biggest question isn't simply whether Clark will become Superman again. The real question is, if Clark gets his powers back, will he still believe that being Superman is the only way he can be a hero? Because after this episode, I don't think he will. What do you think? Will Clark eventually regain his powers? Or is Season 3 preparing us for a completely different version of Superman? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you enjoyed this My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 7 Ending Explained, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Title: My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 8. Review and Ending Explained. Intro: What if saving the future actually made things worse? That is the terrifying question at the heart of My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 8. After the shocking events of the previous episode, Clark Kent has lost his Kryptonian powers, Jonathan Kent has returned from the future, and the timeline has already been changed. But this episode takes that idea even further. Because when Jonathan returns to the past again, something is immediately wrong. His parents remember him. His sister remembers him. His aunt remembers him. But Jonathan himself doesn't remember any of them. And that's when we realize that the heroes didn't simply change the future. They completely rewrote Jonathan's life. Meanwhile, General Amanda Waller is back in control. Lex Luthor is developing a terrifying new weapon called the Eradicator. Kara is forced to confront another possible future, and Lois begins questioning whether she is actually capable of being the mother her future children need. And by the end of the episode, the situation becomes even more dangerous. Kara is seemingly lost. The Eradicator has escaped into the time stream. Clark may have found a way to get his powers back, and the future of the entire Superman family is once again hanging by a thread. So today we're breaking down the entire episode, explaining what happened to Jonathan, why Lara is so different, what the Eradicator really means for the future, Kara's emotional sacrifice, and exactly what that final scene could mean for the rest of Season 3. Let's get into it. Section 1. The New Future. The episode begins with one of the biggest consequences of the previous episode. Clark and Lois are meeting two teenagers from the future. But this time, something is very different. Lois introduces herself to Lara and Jonathan. And almost immediately, Jonathan realizes something is wrong. He doesn't recognize them. In fact, Jonathan says that he's never been here before. That's impossible, because according to Lois and Clark, Jonathan had already traveled back in time only a month earlier. They remember fighting alongside him. They remember saving Clark. They remember Jonathan saying goodbye. But this Jonathan has absolutely no memory of those events. And that gives us the first major reveal of the episode. When the heroes changed the timeline, they didn't simply repair the future. They created a completely different version of Jonathan. The Jonathan who previously traveled into the past is essentially gone. This new Jonathan has lived an entirely different life. And there's an even bigger difference. This time, Jonathan has a sister. Her name is Lara. For Lois, this is obviously a huge shock. She's looking at two children from the future and realizing that her entire future has changed. But for Jonathan, it's even more disturbing. Everyone seems to know him. Everyone remembers events that he doesn't. It's almost like he has been dropped into someone else's life. And that creates one of the most interesting ideas in this episode. What makes someone the same person after the timeline changes? Is Jonathan still the same Jonathan? Or is he an entirely different person? The episode doesn't give us an easy answer. Instead, It uses Jonathan's confusion to show us that changing the future comes with consequences. Section 2. Lara and Jonathan. Lara is another major mystery. Unlike Jonathan, she remembers the previous timeline. She knows Clark and Lois. She knows Kara. She knows what happened before. But Jonathan doesn't, and that immediately creates tension between the siblings. Jonathan feels like everyone is treating him as if he's supposed to know them, but he doesn't. He even becomes frustrated when people call him Superboy, because in his mind, he isn't Superboy, he's Superman. And that tells us a lot about this version of Jonathan. He didn't grow up with the same experiences. He didn't have the same relationship with Clark. He didn't have the same journey. He had to become a hero without the support system that existed in the previous timeline. And eventually, we learn why. Jonathan and Lara were sent back in time on a mission. Their mission? Kill Lex Luthor. And the person who sent them was General Lane. At least, that's what they believe. This is where the episode becomes even more complicated, because the future Jonathan and Lara come from is horrifying. Lex Luthor controls an army of Kryptonian clones called the Eradicators. These creatures are created from Superman's living tissue, and they are mentally controlled by Lex. So from a perspective, killing Lex before he can unleash this army makes perfect sense. But Clark and Lois immediately understand the problem. You cannot simply travel through time and assassinate someone because of what they might do. Because the moment you change that event, you may create an even worse future. And that's exactly what seems to be happening. Section 3. Amanda Waller and Lex Luthor. The episode then brings Amanda Waller back into the story. And this is a major development. Waller is once again in charge. Lex is no longer the person controlling the situation. Instead, Lex is working under Waller, and she has no interest in giving him unlimited power. Lex presents Project Eradicator as the ultimate weapon. His argument is simple. Humanity needs something powerful enough to protect itself from Superman and other extraterrestrial threats. The Eradicator is supposed to accomplish exactly that. It can repair itself. It can evolve. And most importantly, Lex believes he can control it through his own mind. He has literally placed part of his own brain into the machine. That is already disturbing. But Waller isn't impressed. She shuts down the project. And this is where Lex makes a very important mistake. He tries to convince Waller that there are even bigger threats coming from space. But Waller refuses to listen. She believes Superman has already proven himself, and she would rather deal with aliens than give Lex Luthor control over a weapon like the Eradicator. Unfortunately, the damage has already been done, because when Lara and Jonathan arrive to stop Lex, the Eradicator is activated. And once it wakes up, nobody can control it, not even Lex. Section 4. Lara's relationship with Lois. While all of this is happening, Lois is struggling emotionally. She looks at Lara and starts blaming herself. She believes that maybe she's the reason Lara turned out this way. After all, in both versions of the future, Lois feels like she failed her children. The first Jonathan came from a future where Clark was dead. Now, this Jonathan and Lara come from a future where General Lane sent them back to kill Lex. And Lois begins wondering whether she is somehow responsible for creating these terrible futures. Clark tries to reassure her, but Lois doesn't feel reassured. She feels like her children keep getting hurt because of choices she and Clark made. And that becomes one of the emotional themes of the episode. Being a parent isn't about creating a perfect future. It's about being there for your children. And Lois is terrified that she isn't doing enough. Section 5. The Eradicator awakens. Then everything falls apart. Lara confronts Lex. The Eradicator appears. And very quickly, it becomes obvious that this isn't the weapon Lex imagined. It is evolving too quickly. It isn't following commands. It's thinking for itself. And that is terrifying, because Lex created the Eradicator to control Superman-level power. Instead, he created something that can control itself. Lara tries to fight it. Jonathan tries to help. Clark and Lois are also caught in the chaos. But the Eradicator is simply too powerful. Then comes one of the most heartbreaking moments of the episode. Kara Artemis. She sees Jonathan in danger, and she realizes she has to protect him. Jonathan has already lost Kara once in the previous timeline. She was his teacher, his best friend, the person who taught him how to use his powers, the person who taught him how to fight, and the person who showed him that the world could still be kind. Then she died. So when Kara sees this version of Jonathan struggling, she refuses to let history repeat itself. She tells him that he isn't the only one who has seen different futures. Kara has seen them too, and she believes that something extremely important. The future isn't fixed. They can still choose a better tomorrow. Section 6. Kara's sacrifice. Kara then faces the Eradicator, and this becomes one of the biggest emotional moments of the entire season. Jonathan watches as Kara fights to protect him. He doesn't want to lose her again, but Kara is determined. She considers Jonathan family, and that's why she's willing to risk everything. The Eradicator attacks. Kara is overwhelmed, and eventually she goes down. Jonathan screams for her, but she doesn't get back up. For Jonathan, this is a nightmare repeating itself. He already lost Kara in his original future, and now he believes he has lost her again. This is also important because it demonstrates the consequences of changing the timeline. They saved one future, but created another where the people they love can still be lost. The timeline is not simply moving from bad to good. It is constantly changing, and every change creates new possibilities. Section 7. The Eradicator enters the time stream. After Kara's defeat, Jonathan realizes something even worse has happened. The Eradicator is loose. Not just in Metropolis, not just in the present. It's loose in the time stream. That means the Eradicator can potentially affect different points in history. And this could be the key to understanding the larger story of Season 3. The characters aren't just fighting villains anymore. They're fighting consequences. Every attempt to fix the future creates another branch. Every attempt to prevent a disaster creates another possible disaster. And now they have a weapon capable of moving through that entire timeline. That makes the Eradicator one of the most dangerous threats we've seen so far. Section 8. Amanda Waller arrests Lex. Amanda Waller arrives, and from her perspective, this entire situation is a disaster. Jonathan and Lara are time travelers. Lex activated an unauthorized weapon, and the Eradicator has escaped. Lex tries to explain himself. He claims he was building the weapon to protect humanity, but Waller isn't buying it. She orders Wilson to arrest Lex, and this is a major shift. Lex Luthor has once again lost control of his own creation. The very weapon he believed would make him powerful has now become a threat to everyone. And the irony is obvious. Lex wanted to control the future. Instead, he created something that can literally move through time. Section 9. Lois and Clark's biggest decision. After everything that happens, Clark and Lois finally have a quiet moment. And Clark reveals something huge. He thinks he knows where his powers are. He believes he might be able to get Superman back. But there is a catch. He has to leave, for a while. And Lois hates the idea, because from her perspective, Clark has already been gone emotionally and physically. She doesn't want to lose him again. She also has 2 future children in front of her. Kara is injured. The Eradicator is loose. The future is collapsing. And now Clark wants to leave again. Lois admits that she is afraid. She doesn't trust herself to take care of the children alone. She believes she has failed them before. But Clark tells her something extremely important. She isn't the person who sent them back. She isn't the person who created their futures. She is their mother, and they need her. Not some future version of Lois. Not a perfect Lois. They need the Lois standing in front of them right now. That is an incredibly important message. Because the episode has spent so much time showing different versions of the future. Different Jonathans, different Karas, different versions of Lois and Clark. But the answer isn't trying to become some perfect future version of themselves. It's choosing who they want to be now. Section 10. The ending explained. And then we reach the ending. Clark promises Lois that he'll come back. He believes he can restore his powers. And if he's right, Superman could return. But the bigger question is, what exactly happened to the timeline? The previous timeline was changed when Jonathan went back and helped save Clark. That prevented the future, where cyborg Superman destroyed the world. But it didn't create a perfect future. Instead, it created a new timeline. A timeline where Jonathan has different memories. A timeline where Lara exists. A timeline where General Lane sends his children into the past. And a timeline where Lex develops the Eradicator. So the heroes may have saved one future, but they haven't necessarily saved the timeline itself. And now the Eradicator is loose in the time stream. That could mean that events from multiple possible futures may begin colliding. And that would explain why the characters keep encountering versions of themselves and their loved ones from completely different realities. Section 11. What does Lara mean for the future? Lara is arguably one of the most important additions in this episode. She represents a future that didn't exist before. And that's the point. Because Lara proves that the future isn't predetermined. In one timeline, Jonathan is the child of Clark and Lois. In another timeline, Jonathan and Lara exist together, and their personalities are completely different. That means their future isn't simply a fixed road. It is shaped by the choices made in the present. Lara is also extremely similar to Lois in one important way. She acts quickly. She takes action. She wants to protect her family. And she doesn't wait for someone else to solve the problem. That could eventually create tension between Lara and Lois, because Lois may see pieces of herself in her daughter. And at the same time, she may be afraid that those same qualities could put Lara in danger. Section 12. What does the Eradicator mean? The Eradicator could be even more important. Lex created it using Superman's living tissue. So the weapon is directly connected to Clark. But because it can evolve and repair itself, it isn't just another Superman clone. It's something new, something that can potentially adapt to whatever attacks are used against it. And now that it is loose in the time stream, the danger is much greater. Imagine a Superman-level creature appearing in different points in history. It could potentially alter the events that created every future we've seen. It could even be responsible for some of the differences between the timelines. That's why Clark getting his powers back is so important. The heroes may need Superman more than ever. Section 13. The biggest theme of the episode. But underneath all the time travel, superheroes, and alternate futures, Episode 8 is really about one idea. You cannot control the future. Jonathan tried to save his future. Kara tried to protect Jonathan. Lex tried to control Superman-level power. General Lane tried to eliminate future threats before they happened. Waller tried to control humanity's response to aliens. And Lois is trying to become the perfect mother before she even knows what kind of future she's going to have. But none of them can actually control what comes next. And that is why the line about choosing a better tomorrow becomes so important. The future isn't something you discover. It's something you create. Every decision changes what comes next. And that's exactly what this entire season has been showing us. Section 14, Review. As a review, this episode works extremely well because it doesn't simply continue the previous storyline. It complicates it. The heroes thought they had changed the future for the better. Instead, they discover that the future is constantly changing around them. Jonathan's identity crisis gives the episode an emotional center. Lara gives us another perspective on what the Superman family could become. Kara's sacrifice gives the episode its biggest emotional punch, and the Eradicator gives the season a major new threat. But perhaps the strongest part is the relationship between Lois and Clark. Clark has lost his powers. Lois is terrified that she can't protect the family, and both of them are forced to confront the possibility that being Superman and Lois Lane doesn't automatically make them perfect parents. They have to learn as they go, and that makes them feel more human. So where does the story go from here? The biggest question is whether Clark can actually regain his powers. If he succeeds, Superman could return at exactly the moment the world needs him most. But even if Superman returns, the bigger problem remains. The Eradicator is somewhere in the time stream. Jonathan and Lara come from a future that is already changing. Kara's fate is uncertain. Lex is under arrest. And Lois and Clark are now facing a future that neither of them fully understands. But there is one thing we know for sure. The future they were trying to reach no longer exists exactly the way it did before. And maybe that's the entire point. Because Superman has always been about hope. Not the belief that everything will magically work out, but the belief that even when the future looks impossible, we can still choose what happens next. Clark may have lost his powers. Jonathan may have lost his original future. Kara may have lost her way. But none of them have lost their ability to choose. And that could be the key to defeating the Eradicator. Not just strength, not just Kryptonian powers, but the ability to decide what kind of future they want to create. And if Clark really can become Superman again, the next battle may be the biggest one yet. Because this time, they're not simply trying to save Metropolis. They're trying to save the future itself. What if Superman finally got exactly what he wanted, his powers back? But there was one condition. He had to prove that he was strong enough to deserve them. And that question becomes the heart of my adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 9. After the devastating events of the previous episode, Clark Kent is powerless, Kara is badly injured, Jonathan and Lara are stranded in the present, and the Eradicator is loose somewhere in the time stream. Meanwhile, Clark discovers that the strange visions calling him toward Krypton's ancient past weren't actually a simple way to restore his powers. They were a test created by an ancient version of Brainiac, who believes that strength means domination, conquest, and survival of the strongest. Clark, however, is about to prove that they couldn't be more wrong. Because this episode isn't really asking whether Clark can become Superman again. It's asking a much bigger question. What does it actually mean to be Superman? And by the end of the episode, Clark gives us his answer. Let's break down everything that happens in my adventures with Superman Season 3, Episode 9, including Clark's Kryptonian trial, Kara and Jonathan's emotional reunion, Lex Luthor's connection to the Eradicator, and that shocking ending. Part 1. Clark returns to ancient Krypton. The episode opens with Clark finally reaching the mysterious location that has been calling him. But instead of finding some simple source of Kryptonian power, Clark finds something much more disturbing. He sees Rao, or more specifically, the ancient Kryptonian version of Rao. And then he meets Brainiac. But this isn't exactly the Brainiac we've seen before. This version claims to be the Brainiac of old Krypton. According to him, the corrupted Brainiac Clark previously encountered was twisted and changed over thousands of years. This ancient Brainiac believes he represents the original Kryptonian ideal. And unfortunately for Clark, that ideal is based on one thing: strength. Brainiac tells Clark that they can restore his powers. But first, Clark has to prove that he's worthy. And that's where things get interesting. Brainiac asks Clark whether losing his powers to a human means he's actually strong. Clark immediately rejects that philosophy. He doesn't believe hurting people makes someone strong. But Brainiac isn't interested in Clark's opinion. Instead, he sends Clark into Krypton's ancient past. There, Clark discovers something about Krypton's history. The Kryptonians weren't always powerful. They were once primitive, weak, and unable to fly. Then invaders from the stars attacked them, and the ancient Kryptonians conquered those invaders. They stole their technology. They learned the secrets of strength and flight. And eventually, they transformed their dying star into Rao. This became the foundation of Kryptonian civilization. Brainiac's lesson is obvious. Krypton became powerful because it conquered the weak. And now he wants Clark to repeat that history. Part 2. The invaders arrive. Brainiac tells Clark that the same type of invaders are about to attack. Clark is ordered to defeat them. But there's one major problem. Clark doesn't want to hurt anyone. Even though Brainiac insists the enemies are real and that Clark could actually die during the test, Clark still refuses to accept that strength means killing. Meanwhile, back in the present, things are getting worse. Kara is alive, but she's badly injured, and Amanda Waller immediately takes control. Waller views Jonathan and Lara as military assets. She doesn't see them as children. She sees them as weapons. And that's an important contrast with Clark. Clark believes power exists to protect people. Waller believes power exists to defeat threats. The kids are now being treated like soldiers in a war. and they're not happy about it. Part 3. The future kids are falling apart. Lara and Jonathan are already struggling with everything that's happened. Remember, these kids have traveled through time because they believe the present is responsible for their future. They've lost their original lives. They've watched people they love die, and now their entire future has been rewritten. Lara is particularly angry because she feels like she's constantly being forced to fix problems caused by adults. Jonathan is even worse. He's convinced that everyone secretly wishes he were like his father, and that's something that has been building since his introduction. Jonathan doesn't just want to be Superman. He wants to know that he's good enough to be Superman. But because he's from a future where Clark died, he has spent his entire life comparing himself to the version of his father he never got enough time with. And now, when Clark is actually standing right in front of him, Jonathan doesn't know how to deal with it. He feels like he's failing. Again. Part 4. Lois tries to be a mother. Lois is struggling too. She has already lost one version of Jonathan because the timeline changed. Now, she has another version of her son standing in front of her. And this Jonathan doesn't even know her. So Lois has to deal with something incredibly painful. She's a mother to someone who doesn't remember being her son. And she doesn't know whether she can actually help him. She even tells herself that maybe she's the problem. Maybe she's the reason Lara turned out this way. Maybe she's the reason Jonathan is so angry. But then Lara reminds her of something important. Future Lois gave Lara the same kind of advice that present-day Lois is giving her now. The future version of Lois wasn't perfect, but she was still there. And that's what Lara needs. Not another perfect plan. Not another Superman. She needs a mother who believes in her. Part 5. Kara wakes up. One of the episode's sweetest moments comes when Kara finally wakes up, and Jimmy has been sitting beside her the entire time. He refuses to leave her alone again. Kara notikis, and it shows just how much Jimmy has changed. Previously, Kara believed Jimmy had abandoned her emotionally. Jimmy thought Kara had moved on. Both of them misunderstood each other. But now Jimmy is finally showing her what he actually feels. He stayed, he waited, and he wants to help. At the same time, Lois asks Kara to help her deal with Jonathan. And Kara immediately understands what Jonathan needs. Not another military commander. Not another lecture. He needs someone who believes in him. Part 6. Jonathan's breakdown. Kara finds Jonathan hiding on the moon. And Jonathan finally opens up. He tells Kara that he believes everyone wishes he were his father. He believes he's constantly failing. First he failed to stop the Eradicator. Then Lara got hurt. Then Kara got hurt. And now he's convinced everyone is comparing him to Superman. But Kara gives him a different perspective. She reminds Jonathan that Clark isn't perfect. The reason people admire Clark isn't because he never fails. It's because he never gives up. That distinction is extremely important, because Jonathan has misunderstood what being Superman actually means. He thinks Superman is someone who always wins. Kara explains that Superman is someone who keeps fighting for his family even after losing. And Jonathan finally understands. He doesn't have to become Clark. He has to become himself. So Jonathan returns. Not because Waller ordered him to. Not because he wants to prove himself, but because his family needs him. Part 7. Lex Luthor and the Eradicator. Back in the present, Lex Luthor has discovered something extremely important. The Eradicator is connected to a temporal anomaly, and that means the creature isn't simply traveling through space. It's moving through time. This makes it almost impossible to predict where or when it will appear. Waller prepares an operation called Doomsday. The plan is to establish 2 lines of defense. The first is made up of superhumans. Jonathan and Lara will fight. Kara will lead them, and Agent Wilson will coordinate the operation. But there's another problem. Lex wants to escape, and Lois confronts him. She reminds him that the Eradicator exists because of him. Lex tries to justify everything. He claims he was trying to protect humanity. He claims he was preparing for alien threats. But Lois isn't buying it anymore. She tells him the truth. The aliens have been paying for his mistakes. And now it's time for Lex to stop pretending he's the hero. It's one of the strongest moments for Lois in the episode. Part 8. Clark's final test. Meanwhile, Clark is still in ancient Krypton. The invaders arrive, and Clark discovers something horrifying. They aren't monsters. They aren't evil. They're refugees. They are people desperately trying to survive. And Brainiac still tells Clark to kill them. Clark refuses. He realizes the entire test is based on a lie. Brainiac wants him to believe that strength means defeating weaker people. But Clark understands something different. Strength means choosing not to abuse your power. Clark tries to protect the refugees. And because he refuses to kill them, Brainiac declares that he has failed. Clark is seemingly doomed. But then something changes. Clark realizes the true meaning of the test. The ancient Kryptonians were once conquerors, but their civilization eventually disappeared. Their empire didn't survive. Their philosophy didn't save them. And Clark doesn't need to repeat their mistakes. He doesn't need to dominate anyone. He needs to protect people. That's his strength. Part 9. The shocking truth about the Coluans. Clark finally confronts Brainiac. Brainiac reveals that the invaders are actually connected to the ancient history of Krypton. And Clark discovers something deeply ironic. The beings Brainiac wanted him to conquer eventually called Clark their friend. That's when Brainiac tells him the real reason he failed. Clark was supposed to dominate the Coluans. Instead, he befriended them, and Brainiac considers that weakness. But Clark sees it differently. He asks a devastating question: where's your empire now? And suddenly Brainiac's entire philosophy falls apart. Because if strength means domination, then why did the great Kryptonian empire disappear? Why did their civilization die? Why has their supposed perfect philosophy survived only as an ancient memory? Clark realizes something else too. The person he met during the test, the one he helped, wasn't just a random character. He was a servant of the Kryptonian Empire, someone who had spent thousands of years obeying the people above him. And Clark feels genuine sympathy for him. He doesn't see him as weak. He sees him as someone who was exploited. That is the exact opposite of Brainiac's worldview. Part 10. Clark gets his answer. Brainiac tells Clark that there can only be two things: strength and weakness. But Clark rejects that. He chooses compassion. He chooses friendship. He chooses family. And most importantly, he chooses humanity. This is what makes Clark worthy. Not his Kryptonian blood, not his strength, not his ability to fly, not even his powers. His willingness to protect people is what makes him Superman. And that's why the episode's Kryptonian trial is so important. Clark didn't earn his powers by becoming more Kryptonian. He earned them by proving that he could reject the worst parts of Krypton's legacy. Part 11. The Eradicator arrives. Back in the present, the Doomsday operation begins. And suddenly Lex's fears become reality. The Eradicator arrives. Everyone prepares for the fight. But there's something different about Clark. He's back, and he tells everyone that he is Superman. However, this isn't simply a superhero comeback. Clark has changed. Before losing his powers, Clark believed being Superman meant having the ability to save everyone. After losing his powers, he believed he wasn't Superman anymore. But now he understands the truth. Superman was never about the powers. The powers were simply a tool. The person underneath them was always Clark Kent. And that's why Clark is able to return. Part 12. The biggest reveal. The episode ends with Clark confronting Brainiac again. Brainiac insists that Clark failed. But Clark sees the truth. He defeated the leader of the invaders. But he didn't conquer them. He earned their trust. They called him friend. And that is precisely why Brainiac believes Clark is unworthy. But Clark doesn't care, because now he knows what his strength actually is. Brainiac believes the strong control the weak. Clark believes the strong protect the vulnerable. That difference is the entire ideological conflict between Superman and Brainiac. And it's why Clark's return is so powerful. Ending explained. So, what does the ending actually mean? The biggest revelation is that Clark's powers aren't simply being restored because he passed a physical challenge. He passed a moral one. The ancient Brainiac wanted Clark to become the kind of Kryptonian conqueror that built the original Kryptonian Empire. But Clark refused. And by refusing to become that person, he proved that he was stronger than the philosophy that created Krypton. That's why Brainiac considers him a failure. But from the audience's perspective, Clark actually won. He didn't become Superman again by becoming stronger. He became Superman again by understanding what strength really means. What happens to Jonathan and Lara? The future kids remain one of the most emotional parts of the season. Jonathan has spent the entire story believing that he's a disappointment. But Kara helps him realize that he doesn't have to become another Clark Kent. He can become Jonathan. Lara has a similar problem. She's trying desperately to become the perfect soldier because she thinks that's what her family needs. But Lois teaches her that she doesn't have to follow someone else's plan. She needs to trust herself. And that's important because the future is still unstable. The kids have already seen multiple possible futures. They've seen Clark die. They've seen Kara die. They've seen their world destroyed. But this episode reinforces the show's biggest theme. The future isn't fixed. Every choice changes it. The real meaning of strength. This episode is ultimately about the definition of strength. Brainiac's definition is simple. Strength means power. Strength means domination. Strength means defeating anyone weaker than you. Clark's definition is completely different. Strength means having power and choosing restraint. Strength means protecting people who cannot protect themselves. Strength means forgiving people. Strength means accepting failure. And sometimes, strength means admitting that you need help. That's why Clark's compassion toward the refugees matters so much. He could have killed them. It would have been easier. It would have satisfied Brainiac's test. But Clark refuses. Because if saving people requires becoming a monster, then the victory isn't worth having. Final review. Overall, My Adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 9 is one of the most important episodes of the season because it finally answers a question the series has been building toward for a long time. What makes Clark Superman? And the answer isn't Kryptonian biology. It isn't his powers. It isn't his costume. It's Clark's choices. The episode also does a great job connecting several storylines. Clark's loss of powers, Jonathan's insecurity, Lara's struggle with leadership, Kara's recovery, Lois learning to trust herself as a mother, Lex's creation of the Eradicator, and Brainiac's ancient Kryptonian philosophy. All of these stories are really exploring the same idea. Who are you when everything that wants to find you is taken away? Clark lost his powers. Jonathan lost his original future. Lara lost the family history she knew. Kara lost her confidence. Lois lost the certainty that her future was fixed. And Lex is desperately trying to control the future because he's terrified of what he can't control. But the heroes are learning to accept uncertainty. The most important message of this episode is simple. You don't become Superman because you're powerful. You become Superman because of what you do with that power. Clark could have become the conqueror Brainiac wanted. Instead, he chose compassion. Jonathan could have stayed angry. Instead, he came back. Lara could have followed orders blindly. Instead, she learned to trust herself. Kara could have given up. Instead, she got back on her feet. And Lois could have convinced herself that she was a failure. Instead, she chose to keep trying. That is what makes this episode so important. The future may look terrifying. The Eradicator may still be out there. Lex Luthor is still dangerous. Brainiac's influence clearly isn't finished. And Clark's return doesn't magically solve every problem. But now the characters understand something they didn't understand before. The future isn't something they're supposed to survive. It's something they're supposed to build. And that brings us to the biggest question heading into the next episode. Can Superman stop the Eradicator before it destroys the timeline? And what will happen when Clark finally discovers exactly what Lex has unleashed? Because after everything we've seen in Season 3, one thing is certain. The future of Superman's world has never been more dangerous. And this time, saving it may require more than Superman alone. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more My Adventures with Superman Season 3 reviews, ending explanations, theories, and episode breakdowns. What if Superman's greatest enemy isn't strong enough to defeat him, but is capable of taking away the very thing that makes him Superman? That's exactly where My Adventures with Superman Season 3 has brought us. After 9 episodes of time travel, alternate futures, Cyborg Superman, the Eradicator, Clark losing his powers, and the arrival of his future children, Season 3 is finally reaching its biggest moment. The Season 3 finale is titled The Return, and that title is already raising a huge question. What exactly is returning? Is it Superman? Are Clark's powers finally coming back? Is Jonathan returning to his original future? Or could the return be referring to something much bigger? Because after everything that happened in Episode 9, Clark is still separated from his family. The Eradicator is more powerful than ever. Jonathan and Lara are struggling to stop it. Kara has already been badly injured, and Lex Luthor's experiment has created a threat capable of evolving through time. And the latest finale material makes one thing very clear. The heroes are going to need Superman. So today we're breaking down everything we know about Episode 10, what the latest promo reveals, what the ending could mean, and the biggest questions the finale needs to answer. Part 1, where we left Clark. Let's start with the biggest storyline. Clark Kent has spent the second half of the season without his powers. After the battle with Hank Henshaw in Episode 5, Clark admitted something that terrified him. He couldn't feel his powers anymore. He couldn't be Superman. And for Clark, that wasn't just the loss of super strength or flight. It was an identity crisis. For years, Clark believed that being Superman meant protecting everyone. But suddenly he couldn't do that. And then Episode 9 gave us the answer he had been searching for. Clark traveled to the ancient Kryptonian past and encountered the original Brainiac intelligence. Brainiac wanted Clark to prove that he was worthy of Kryptonian power. But Brainiac's definition of strength was completely different from Clark's. Brainiac believed strength meant conquest, dominating weaker civilizations, destroying anything that stood in your way. Clark refused. Instead of killing the so-called invaders, Clark protected them. And that's when the entire test was turned upside down. Clark didn't fail because he was weak. He failed because he refused to become the kind of conqueror Brainiac wanted him to be. And that could be the key to the finale. Part 2, why the title The Return matters. The official title is The Return, and there are several possible meanings. The obvious one is Superman's return. The latest promotional material heavily points toward Clark potentially getting his powers back and returning to the battlefield. One recent preview specifically asks whether Clark will regain his powers and how the Eradicator can possibly be stopped if he doesn't. But I think the title has a deeper meaning. Because Clark doesn't simply need to return physically. He needs to return emotionally. Remember what Lois told him earlier. She loves Clark Kent, even if he never becomes Superman again. And that was one of the most important moments of Season 3. Clark thought, if I can't be Superman, then what am I? But Lois gave him the answer. He's still Clark. He's still her partner. He's still the person his family needs. And now Clark has to take that lesson into the finale. Part 3. The Eradicator is not just another villain. The Eradicator is different from the villains we've seen before. Hank Henshaw wanted revenge. Lex Luthor wanted control. Brainiac wanted domination. But the Eradicator represents something much more dangerous. Evolution without morality. Lex created the Eradicator from Superman's living tissue. The goal was to create something that could self-repair and self-evolve. And that's exactly what happened. The problem is that once the Eradicator became independent, it no longer needed Lex. It could evolve beyond its creator. And Episode 9 made that terrifyingly clear. The Eradicator was able to return through the time stream and create another body. That means defeating one Eradicator may not be enough. Because the threat isn't necessarily one individual anymore. It's a system that can reproduce itself. And that's why the finale could become a completely different kind of Superman battle. Part 4. The Eradicator's biggest advantage. The Eradicator has already defeated some of the strongest characters in the series. Kara was taken down. Jonathan struggled against it. Lara couldn't stop it. Even the combined efforts of the future Kryptonians weren't enough. And that's important, because if Clark simply gets his powers back and punches the Eradicator harder than everyone else, it would completely undermine the emotional story of the season. The writers have spent the entire season asking, is Superman just his powers? So the finale needs to give us a different answer. Clark's powers might return, but his victory should depend on something more than strength. It should depend on everything he's learned. Part 5. Jonathan's role in the finale. Jonathan is probably one of the most important characters in this finale. This season introduced him as a boy from a future where Superman was dead. He grew up believing that his father was the greatest hero who ever lived. And then he traveled into the past and met Clark. But instead of finding the perfect Superman he imagined, he found a Clark who was vulnerable. A Clark who lost his powers. A Clark who didn't know what was going to happen. And that completely changed Jonathan's relationship with his father. Jonathan started believing that he wasn't good enough. He compared himself to Superman constantly. But Kara eventually gave him the answer. He doesn't need to be his father. He needs to be Jonathan. And that's exactly what the finale should test. Jonathan doesn't need to defeat the Eradicator by himself. He needs to understand that being a hero doesn't mean winning every fight. Sometimes it means coming back after you've failed. Part 6. Lara also has something to prove. Lara's story is equally important. She has spent her life preparing for war. She was raised in a future where survival mattered more than anything. And because of that, she tended to trust orders more than herself. But Lois has been teaching her something completely different. Trust yourself. Make your own choices. Don't let fear decide your future. And that could become extremely important in episode 10. Because the entire season has been built around the idea that the future isn't fixed. We've already seen multiple versions of Jonathan. We've seen different versions of Kara. We've seen different possible outcomes. So the finale doesn't simply have to save the present. It has to decide which future is worth creating. Part 7. Lois is the key to the future. And then there's Lois. Honestly, Lois may be the emotional center of the finale, because she's now dealing with something no mother should have to deal with. She has met multiple versions of her future children. She has watched one version disappear. She's seen another version arrive angry and confused. And she's terrified that she's going to fail them. But that's exactly why her story matters. Lois doesn't have future knowledge. She doesn't have superpowers. She can't travel through time. But she has something else. She knows how to believe in people. And that's why she's been able to connect with Lara and Jonathan. She isn't trying to control their future. She's trying to help them build one. Part 8. What happens to Lex Luthor? Then we have Lex. And Lex has become one of the biggest wild cards in Season 3. He created the Eradicator. He believed he could control it. And he was wrong. Now the monster he created is threatening the entire timeline. The question is, will Lex finally admit that he was wrong? Or will he try to control the situation again? Episode 9 already showed Lex trying to escape responsibility. But Jimmy challenged him, and Lois challenged him. So the finale could finally force Lex to make a choice. Does he continue being the villain who believes only he can save humanity? Or does he finally do something that actually helps people? If Lex contributes to defeating the Eradicator, that doesn't mean he's suddenly a hero, but it could make him more complicated. And that's exactly what this version of Lex has always been. Part 9. The biggest question. Will Clark get his powers back? This is obviously the question everyone wants answered. And based on the finale's promotional material, the possibility is extremely strong. The episode 10 preview specifically frames the situation around Clark's powers and the question of whether he'll return as Superman. But here's the interesting part. I don't think Clark's powers returning should be treated as the ultimate victory, because episode 9 already gave us the answer. Clark proved that he was Superman even without his powers. He protected the refugees. He refused to become a conqueror. He showed compassion when Brainiac demanded violence. So when Clark eventually returns to the battlefield, he's not becoming Superman again. He is realizing that he never stopped being Superman. And that's a much more satisfying conclusion. Part 10. Bizarro could be important. Another major question heading into the finale is Bizarro. Episode 9's events have made Bizarro more important than he initially appeared. And according to recent reporting on Episode 9, Bizarro intervened when Clark was in serious danger during the ancient Kryptonian sequence. That means Bizarro isn't simply a Joe character. He's connected to Clark's story. He's another imperfect version of Superman. And that's exactly why he fits this season. Clark spent the season believing he needed to be Superman. Jonathan believed he needed to become Superman. Lara is struggling with expectations, and Bizarro literally represents a distorted version of Superman. So the finale could use Bizarro to reinforce the message. You don't have to be perfect to be a hero. Part 11, the biggest battle of the season. Now let's talk about the actual finale battle. The Eradicator has evolved. It has already demonstrated that it can survive attacks that should destroy it. And according to the latest preview coverage, the finale's trailer shows Eradicator claiming to have killed Supergirl, Jonathan, and Lara, and becoming even more powerful, while also being capable of producing duplicates. If that's accurate, the heroes are going to be facing an enemy that can essentially multiply its threat. That's why Superman can't simply fight alone. Kara, Jonathan, Lara, Lois, Jimmy, Waller, and even Lex all have roles to play. And that would perfectly fit the season's theme. The show has spent 9 episodes showing us that no one person can control the future. So the finale should be about everyone choosing to work together. Part 12. Why the future may change again. There's another huge question. What happens to Jonathan and Lara after the battle? Remember, they came from a future that has already been changed. Jonathan's original timeline was erased. Then another version appeared. And now Lara and Jonathan are living in a present that isn't necessarily the future they came from. So even if they defeat the Eradicator, they may not be able to simply return home. They may return to a future that no longer looks familiar. And that's actually one of the most emotional possibilities for the ending. Maybe the future isn't about restoring what was lost. Maybe it's about accepting that the old future is gone and creating something better. Part 13. What does the return really mean? This is my biggest theory about the title. The return could refer to Superman, but it could also refer to Clark returning to himself. At the beginning of this storyline, Clark loses his powers, and he thinks he's lost Superman. But throughout the season, his family repeatedly tells him that Clark himself is enough. Then Brainiac gives him the final test, and Clark proves that his compassion exists even without power. So if he returns with his abilities in episode 10, the irony is beautiful. He isn't getting his powers back because he finally became strong enough. He's getting them back because he learned he never needed them to be Superman. Part 14, the Brainiac connection. Brainiac's role is another major mystery. The Brainiac in episode 9 claims to be the ancient version of the intelligence, and his philosophy is built around Kryptonian conquest. But Clark's actions completely challenge that philosophy. The irony is that the ancient Kryptonian Empire believed conquest made them powerful. Yet their empire eventually disappeared. Clark's philosophy is the opposite. He believes strength comes from connection, from helping others, from friendship, from family. And that's why Brainiac's ideology may ultimately be defeated not by a punch, but by proving that his entire definition of strength was wrong. Part 15, the emotional ending we could get. If the finale follows the emotional direction established throughout Season 3, I think the biggest payoff won't be the final punch. It will be the family. Imagine Clark finally returning to Lois, after everything they've been through, after she watched him lose his powers, after she worried that their children would never have a future, after Jonathan and Lara changed their entire timeline. The most important moment could simply be Clark coming home, because that's what this season has really been about. Home, not Krypton, not the fortress, not the future, not even Metropolis. Home is the people who refuse to abandon you. And that's something the show has been telling us since Season 2. Part 16, will Jonathan and Lara stay? This is another major question. If the timeline is successfully repaired, Jonathan and Lara could potentially return to their own future. But what would that future look like? Would Clark and Lois still be alive? Would Kara still be there? Would Jonathan remember everything that happened? Would Lara remember the version of Lois who raised her? The show has a huge opportunity here. Instead of simply resetting everything, it could establish that their choices have permanently changed the timeline. And if that happens, the future might actually become something new. Not the future Jonathan feared. Not the future Lara was trained to protect. But a future built by all of them together. Part 17, my prediction for the final fight. Here's how I think the finale could play out. The Eradicator arrives believing that Superman is gone. It has already defeated the future heroes. It believes Clark is powerless. And that gives Clark the opportunity to prove everyone wrong. But he won't defeat the Eradicator alone. Kara will fight beside him. Jonathan will fight beside Kara. Lara will make her own decision instead of following orders. Lois will coordinate the human side of the operation. Jimmy will find a weakness nobody else noticed. And Lex may be forced to use his own technology against the monster he created. Then Clark returns, not as the Superman who believes he has to save everyone, but as the Superman who understands that he doesn't have to do it alone. And that's the Superman the Eradicator won't be able to defeat. Final review and ending explained. So, what are we expecting from my adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 10, The Return? The official material confirms that this is the Season 3 finale, and the promotional build-up centers heavily on the Eradicator threat and the question of Superman's return. But the real story isn't simply, will Superman get his powers back? The real story is, what kind of Superman will return? Clark has spent this season learning that power isn't what makes him a hero. Jonathan has learned that he doesn't have to become his father. Lara is learning to trust herself. Kara is learning that she doesn't have to carry everything alone. Lois is learning that she isn't a failure because she can control the future. And even Lex is being forced to confront the consequences of trying to control everything. The Eradicator represents the opposite of all of this. It evolves without compassion. It has power without humanity. It wants to survive without understanding why life matters. And that's why Superman is the perfect opponent. Because Clark has something the Eradicator can never understand. He cares. Season 3 has taken Superman through some of his darkest moments yet. He lost his powers. He lost confidence in himself. He watched future versions of his family arrive from timelines where everything went wrong. He faced Cyborg Superman. He faced Ancient Brainiac. And now he has to face the monster created from his own biology. But after everything Clark has learned, there's one thing he finally understands. He doesn't need to be perfect. He doesn't need to control the future. And he doesn't need to carry the world alone. He just needs to keep choosing to help people. That's what makes him Superman. And that's why The Return could be one of the most important finales of the entire series. The question isn't whether Clark Kent can return. The question is whether the world he's returning to can survive long enough to see him. And if the Eradicator really has evolved beyond anything Jonathan, Lara, and Kara can handle, then Superman's return may be the only thing standing between this timeline and total destruction. We'll have to see whether the finale delivers on that promise. My adventures with Superman Season 3 Episode 10, The Return. And if this really is the end of Season 3. One final question remains. What happens to Superman after the future is finally rewritten? Because the biggest battle may be over, but the future of this Superman universe could just be beginning.